What if the only man who could protect you was the man you could never forgive? 3 years ago, Thea Brennan buried her brother. Now she's summoned to Greymont House, watched, judged, and quietly undone by Prince Cassian Rothwell, her brother's closest friend, the man who survived, the man who refuses to explain. He won't touch her. He won't speak of the past. But he cannot stay away. Beneath moonlit gardens and whispered scandal, duty and desire will collide, and love will demand a reckoning. Welcome to the Prince's Penance. You're escaping to romance, where longing is dangerous and hearts are never safe. Settle in, and happy listening. The Prince's Penance, Chapter 1. Thea Brennan had forgotten how sound carried in grand houses. At home, what remained of it, she could move through rooms without the floorboards announcing her presence. Here at Greymont House, every step on marble seemed designed to draw attention. The rustle of her travelling dress echoed off vaulted ceilings. Even her breathing felt too loud. She paused in the entrance hall, gripping her reticule tighter than necessary. "Miss Brennan?" A housekeeper materialized from a side corridor, her expression professionally neutral. "You're the last to arrive. The others are taking tea in the west drawing room. If you'll follow me." Thea hadn't realized she was late. The journey from her aunt's house had taken longer than expected. Roads turned to mud after yesterday's rain. She'd watched the countryside pass through the carriage window and tried not to think about what awaited her at the end of it. A royal summons. Phrased as an invitation, of course. The crown did not demand. It merely suggested with the weight of inevitability behind each word. "For your protection and future security, His Majesty requests your presence at Greymont House for the season." Protection. From what? The letter hadn't specified. Future security, well, that was clearer. Thea was 23, unmarried, and her family's circumstances had shifted dramatically in the past 3 years. An advantageous marriage would solve several problems at once. She followed the housekeeper down a corridor lined with portraits of people who'd been important enough to commemorate in oil paint. None of them looked particularly happy about it. The drawing room doors stood open. Thea heard laughter before she saw its source. Light, feminine, the kind that suggested ease rather than genuine amusement. She stepped inside. 6 women, arranged in clusters near the windows and settees. All young, all expensively dressed, all turning to examine the newcomer with varying degrees of interest. A few faces looked vaguely familiar from past seasons in London, though Thea had never moved in their circles comfortably. "Ah, our final guest." This from an older woman rising from a chair near the fireplace. Lady Ashford, according to the letter, their official chaperone. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to managing other people's daughters. "Miss Brennan, welcome. Come, let me introduce you properly." The names blurred together. Miss Hartwell, Miss Dalton, Lady Vivian Holt, a widow, notably younger and more sophisticated than the rest. Miss Cordelia Gray, who had kind eyes. 2 others whose names Thea immediately forgot. "Tea?" Lady Vivian gestured to the service laid out on a low table. "You must be exhausted from travelling." "Thank you." Thea accepted a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands. "We've been trying to determine why we've been summoned," Miss Cordelia said, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Lady Ashford insists it's simply hospitality, but 7 unmarried women recalled to a royal residence? There must be more to it." 8, Lady Vivian corrected. "Miss Pemberton is indisposed upstairs. A headache from the journey." "The timing is curious," one of the other women added. "Just after all that unpleasantness with Lord Marchmont's family." Thea's fingers tightened on her teacup. The Marchmont scandal had broken 4 months ago. Accusations of sedition, of plotting against the crown. It had taken 3 other families down with it, hers included. Not directly accused, but tainted by association. Her father's friendship with Marchmont's late uncle had been enough. "I'm sure His Majesty has his reasons," Lady Ashford said firmly, in a tone that discouraged further speculation. "You're all here as guests. Your comfort and future prospects are the Crown's concern. Nothing more complicated than that." The door opened again. Thea didn't mean to look. She was raising her teacup, focusing on Miss Cordelia's next question, but some shift in the room's attention, made her glance toward the entrance. Crown Prince Cassian Rothwell had the particular stillness of men who'd been trained from birth never to appear hurried. He stood in the doorway, dark coat perfectly fitted, expression composed. His gaze swept the room with the efficiency of someone performing an assessment rather than a greeting. Thea hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since Kit's funeral. He'd been there, she remembered, standing apart from the other mourners, watching the burial with an expression she hadn't been able to read then and couldn't recall clearly now. He'd left before anyone could speak to him. "Your Highness?" Lady Ashford rose, curtsying. The other women followed suit. Thea set down her cup and stood, dropping into the expected courtesy. "Forgive the intrusion," Cassian said. His voice was measured, neither warm nor cold. "I wanted to ensure you'd all arrived safely." "How thoughtful," Lady Vivian said, smiling. "We were just getting acquainted." His attention moved to her. "Lady Vivian, I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Perfectly so, thank you." He addressed each woman in turn, inquiring about their travels, their accommodations, their initial impressions of Greymont. His manner was attentive without being familiar, courteous without warmth, though not unkind. When his gaze reached Thea, something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible, gone almost before she registered it. "Miss Brennan." No inquiry, no pleasantry, just her name, delivered with the same inflection one might use for an item on an inventory list. She met his eyes. They were darker than she remembered. "Your Highness?" A pause stretched between them, just long enough to become noticeable. She waited for him to ask about her journey, her comfort, anything that might mirror what he'd offered the others. Instead, he looked away. "Lady Ashford will see to anything you require," he said, addressing the room generally now. "Dinner is at 8. I'll leave you to your tea." He was gone before anyone could respond, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt louder than it should. Conversation resumed around her, Miss Cordelia remarking on his consideration, Lady Vivian noting how well he carried the weight of his position. Thea reached for her teacup and found her hand unsteady. She told herself it was fatigue from the journey, the strangeness of being here, in this beautiful house that felt more like a gilded waiting room than a home. It had nothing to do with the way he'd looked at her, or rather, the way he'd stopped looking, as if continuing would be a mistake he couldn't afford. That evening, Thea discovered her rooms overlooked the East Gardens. Someone had unpacked her trunk while she'd been at tea. Her few dresses hung in a wardrobe large enough to swallow 3 times her current wardrobe. The vanity held more space than she'd ever need. She sat at the writing desk and pulled out fresh paper, intending to write to her aunt. The words wouldn't come. What was there to say? "I've arrived safely. The house is beautiful. The prince barely acknowledged my existence. That last part felt petty even thinking it." A knock at the door. Her lady's maid, provided by the house, not brought from home, entered with a dress draped over her arm. "For dinner, miss. Lady Ashford sent it. She thought you might prefer something fresh after travelling." The gown was far finer than anything Thea owned. Deep blue silk that would catch the candlelight, embroidery at the bodice that must have taken weeks to complete. "It's too much," Thea said. "Lady Ashford was quite insistent, miss." Of course she was. Can't have the Crown's guests looking shabby at dinner. Thea let herself be dressed, her hair arranged in a style more elaborate than she'd normally attempt. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The gown fit perfectly. They must have obtained her measurements somehow. The colour brought out the grey in her eyes, made her dark hair seem richer. She looked like she belonged here. The feeling lasted until she entered the dining room. The table could have seated 30 comfortably. Tonight, it held 12. The 8 women, Lady Ashford, Prince Cassian at the head, and 2 men Thea didn't recognise who were introduced as Lord Ashford and Sir Gregory Weston, a visiting diplomat. Thea found herself seated between Miss Cordelia and one of the women whose name she'd forgotten. Cassian was too far away for conversation, which felt like both a relief and a disappointment she didn't want to examine. He spoke easily with those near him, Lady Vivian to his right, Miss Hartwell to his left. Thea watched him smile at something Lady Vivian said, watched the way he leaned slightly closer to hear Miss Hartwell's quieter response. She'd never seen him smile. Not that she could remember. "The gardens here are supposed to be extraordinary," Miss Cordelia said beside her. "I thought I might explore them tomorrow if the weather holds." "That sounds lovely." Thea forced her attention back to her dinner companion. "You should join me. I hate walking alone. It feels like I'm pretending to be contemplative when really I'm just bored." Despite everything, Thea felt her mouth curve. "I'd like that." Dinner progressed through multiple courses. Conversation flowed around her. Observations about London, speculation about the upcoming season, carefully neutral comments about recent political developments. No one mentioned Marchmont directly, but his scandal hung over certain topics like smoke. Thea contributed little. She'd never been skilled at dinner party conversation, and tonight she felt even more adrift than usual. She was aware, too aware, of Cassian's presence at the far end of the table, of the easy way he engaged with others, of the careful distance he maintained from her end of the table. She told herself she was imagining it. After dinner, the women withdrew to the music room while the men remained behind for port. Lady Vivian played the pianoforte beautifully. Miss Hartwell sang. Thea sat near the window and tried to look interested rather than exhausted. "You're Kit Brennan's sister." Thea turned. Lady Vivian had left the pianoforte and settled into the chair beside her, moving with the particular grace of women who knew they were watched. "I am," Thea said carefully. "I knew him slightly. My late husband and he served together briefly. He was very well regarded." "Thank you. It must be strange for you, being here." Lady Vivian's gaze was shrewd. "Given the circumstances." Thea kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Prince Cassian was quite close with your brother, wasn't he? Before—" She stopped delicately. "Before Kit died. Before everything fell apart." "They were acquainted," Thea said. "I wouldn't presume to know the depth of their friendship." "Of course." Lady Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to pry." She drifted away to join another conversation, leaving Thea alone with the observation that Lady Vivian absolutely had meant to pry, and had succeeded. Thea didn't see Cassian again that evening. He didn't join them after port, and by the time Lady Ashford suggested they all retire, Thea's head was beginning to ache with genuine rather than diplomatic pain. She climbed the stairs slowly, grateful the day was ending. Her rooms felt too quiet after the forced sociability of dinner. She dismissed her maid and changed into her nightgown herself, taking down her hair with relief. The elaborate style had been pulling at her scalp for hours. She should sleep. Tomorrow would bring more of the same: forced proximity with women she barely knew, careful navigation of unstated rules, the constant awareness of being observed and assessed. Instead, she found herself at the window, looking down at the gardens she'd glimpsed earlier. Moonlight turned them silver. A figure moved along one of the paths. She couldn't tell who from this distance, but the height and bearing suggested a man. He stopped near a fountain, standing very still. Something about the posture tugged at her memory. Kit used to stand like that when he was thinking through a problem he didn't want to share. Shoulders back, hands clasped behind him, head slightly bowed. The figure turned, and moonlight caught his profile. Prince Cassian. Thea stepped back from the window before he could look up and see her watching. Her heart was beating faster than it should. There was no reason for it. She'd merely identified someone in a garden. Nothing significant about that. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up, willing sleep to come. It didn't, for a long time. And when it finally did, she dreamed of Kit's funeral, of standing in the rain beside a grave, of looking up and seeing Cassian Rothwell watching from a distance, his expression carved from stone, before he turned and walked away without a word. Just like he'd done today. Chapter 2. Morning at Greymont House began with bells, not loud ones. Nothing so vulgar as alarm or urgency. Just a soft chime at 7, announcing that the household was waking, that breakfast would be served at 8, that the day's structure was asserting itself whether one was ready or not. Thea had been awake since 6. She'd tried reading, tried writing that letter to her aunt. Eventually gave up and dressed herself before her maid arrived, choosing a simple morning dress in pale green that didn't require assistance. By the time the breakfast bell sounded, she'd already been sitting at her window for 20 minutes, watching the gardens shift from grey to gold as the sun rose. The breakfast room was smaller than the dining room, though still large enough to make their party feel scattered. A sideboard held enough food to feed twice their number: eggs, kippers, bread still warm from the kitchen, jam in crystal dishes that caught the light. Thea took toast and tea and found a seat near Miss Cordelia, who looked remarkably cheerful for the hour. "I thought you might have forgotten about our walk," Cordelia said. "I'm dreadful at waking early, but I managed it. Barely." "I'm an early riser by habit," Thea said. "My family keeps country hours even in town." How practical. This from Lady Vivian, joining them with a plate that held mostly fruit. She looked annoyingly perfect, not a hair out of place, dress already immaculate. "I've never mastered the art of mourning. Give me an evening salon any day." Other women drifted in. Miss Hartwell, quiet and composed. The Dalton sisters, Thea had finally sorted out that there were 2 of them, who seemed to operate as a single unit, finishing each other's sentences. Lady Ashford arrived last, surveying them all with the expression of a general reviewing troops. "His Highness breakfasts privately," she announced, though no one had asked. "He has business in the estate office this morning. However, he'll be available for consultation at 11, should any of you require anything." Thea kept her eyes on her toast. There was no reason that piece of information should register as either relief or disappointment. "Lord Hartley will be joining us for luncheon," Lady Ashford continued. "The Duke of Riversdale," she added, for those who might not recognize the title. He's visiting the area and asked to pay his respects. The Dalton sisters exchanged glances. Even Lady Vivian looked interested. An unmarried duke was worth noticing. Breakfast passed in a flurry of speculation about the duke, discussion of morning activities, and Lady Ashford's gentle but firm guidance on how their days would be structured. There would be music instruction twice weekly, a drawing master on Thursdays, walks, naturally, visits to the village, chaperoned. Evenings would vary, cards, reading, conversation. It sounded pleasant. It sounded suffocating. Thea finished her tea and excused herself, meeting Cordelia by the door. The gardens were even more beautiful than they'd looked from her window. Someone had designed them with both precision and restraint, formal enough to signal wealth and taste, wild enough in places to suggest nature hadn't been entirely conquered. Gravel paths wound between rose beds that wouldn't bloom for months yet. A fountain burbled quietly near a stand of trees that formed a natural screen from the house. "This is perfect," Cordelia said, linking her arm through Thea's as they walked. "I was going mad indoors already. No offense to Greymont, it's beautiful. But beautiful houses can be prisons if you're not careful." Thea glanced at her. Cordelia had seemed the most uncomplicated of their group, cheerful, open, unconcerned with the subtle hierarchies already forming among the women. Perhaps that had been an incomplete assessment. "You don't want to be here," Thea said. "Does anyone? Truly." Cordelia's smile turned wry. "We've been recalled like library books that were out too long. For our own good, naturally. For protection. For advantageous matches. But honestly, I'd rather have been left alone to manage my own disasters." "What disaster were you managing?" "A thoroughly unsuitable attachment to my brother's friend. A second son with good humor and no prospects." Cordelia shrugged. "My mother got wind of it, and suddenly I was needed here. For my protection." She said the last words with delicate mockery. Thea felt something ease in her chest. "My aunt arranged my summons. She thought the Crown's intervention might repair our family's reputation." "Might it?" "I suppose that depends on who I marry." They walked in silence for a moment, following a path that curved toward the trees. "Do you think they'll actually let us choose?" Cordelia asked quietly. "Or is this just a polite way of arranging marriages that suit the Crown's purposes?" Thea didn't have an answer. The question had been hovering at the edge of her thoughts since she'd received the summons. A sound from ahead, voices, low and male. Thea slowed. Two men emerged from behind the screen of trees. One she didn't recognize, tall, fair-haired, dressed for riding. The other was Prince Cassian. "Miss Grey." Cassian's tone was warmer than anything Thea had heard from him. "You're exploring already?" "The gardens are too lovely to resist, Your Highness." Cordelia executed a perfect curtsy. Thea followed suit, keeping her eyes lowered. "May I introduce Lord Hartley?" Cassian said. "He's joining us for luncheon, but I see he's arrived early." "Couldn't resist the estate," Hartley said with an easy smile. "And now I'm doubly glad I came. His Highness didn't mention the company would be so charming." He had the practiced charm of men who knew they were titled, handsome, and worth noticing, but it didn't feel calculated, more like genuine pleasure at an unexpected encounter. "Miss Grey, Miss—" Hartley looked at Thea expectantly. "Brennan?" she supplied. Something flickered across Cassian's face, too quick to read. "A pleasure," Hartley said, bowing. "Are you both settling in well?" Cordelia launched into easy conversation. She had that gift, making small talk seem natural rather than obligatory. Hartley responded in kind, asking about their impressions of Greymont, their plans for the day, whether they'd visited this part of the country before. Cassian said nothing. Thea was aware of him standing slightly apart, hands clasped behind his back in that familiar pose she'd seen from her window. His attention seemed focused on the conversation, but he didn't join it, didn't smile at Hartley's jokes the way Cordelia did, didn't look at Thea at all. "We should return to the house," Cassian said finally, cutting across Hartley's description of a particularly good hunting ground nearby. "I'm sure the ladies would like to continue their walk without interruption." "Of course." Hartley bowed again. "I look forward to luncheon." Cassian turned without further pleasantries and headed back toward the house. Hartley followed, though he glanced back once with an apologetic smile. Cordelia waited until they were out of earshot. "Well, that was awkward." "Was it?" Thea kept her voice neutral. Prince Cassian looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Cordelia resumed walking, tugging Thea along. "Though I suppose that's just his way. My mother says he's been like that since his friend died. Kit Brennan, I think." "Were you—" "Oh." She stopped, eyes widening. "I didn't connect the names. Thea, I'm sorry. That was thoughtless." "It's all right." Thea's throat felt tight. It was 3 years ago. Still. Cordelia squeezed her arm. "No wonder things felt strange just now. Does he know? That you're Kit's sister?" "He knows." They walked in silence. Thea focused on the path ahead, the sound of gravel under their feet, the birds calling from the trees. Anything but the conversation she wasn't having. "Can I ask what happened?" Cordelia's voice was gentle. "You don't have to answer, but everyone says different things, and most of it sounds like gossip." Thea had heard the gossip too. Kit had died in a duel. Kit had died of fever after an injury. Kit had died in some vague political unpleasantness that no one wanted to detail too specifically. "I don't know exactly," Thea admitted. "He was involved in something, an investigation, I think. There was corruption tied to families close to the crown. He was trying to expose it." She paused. "He died before he could." "And Prince Cassian?" "Was there, apparently. I don't know in what capacity." Thea kept her voice steady. "No one would tell me details, just that Kit had died serving the crown's interests, and his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten." Which was what people said when they didn't want to explain what actually happened. "That must have been awful," Cordelia said quietly, not knowing. The not knowing is its own kind of answer. Thea hadn't meant to say that aloud. They'd reached the fountain. Cordelia settled onto the stone bench beside it, pulling Thea down next to her. "Is that why he's so cold to you? Prince Cassian, I mean. Guilt?" "I don't know what it is." Thea watched the water spill over the fountain's edge. "We were never close. I was just Kit's younger sister, always in the background when he and his friends visited. But I thought—" She stopped. "What?" "I thought when Kit died, he might have written, or visited properly. Something more than standing at the funeral like a stranger." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "He knew what Kit meant to our family. He could have—" She cut herself off. This was pointless. Kit was gone. Whatever Cassian Rothwell felt or didn't feel about it was irrelevant to her life now. Except it wasn't. Because she was here, in his house, under his protection, and he couldn't even look at her properly. "Maybe he doesn't know what to say," Cordelia offered. "Then he's just like everyone else." Luncheon was more elaborate than breakfast. A proper meal laid out in the smaller dining room, with Lord Hartley installed as guest of honour. He'd changed into fresh clothes and looked entirely at ease, chatting with Lady Ashford about mutual acquaintances while the women assembled. Thea found herself seated across from him, with Cordelia on one side and Miss Hartwell on the other. Cassian sat at the head of the table again, with Lady Vivian to his right. "I understand you've just arrived, Miss Brennan," Hartley said, once the first course was served. "What do you make of Greymont so far?" "It's beautiful," Thea said. Safe answer. True answer. "But isolated," Hartley said with a sympathetic smile. "I imagine after London it must feel rather quiet." "I prefer quiet, actually." "Do you? How unusual." He didn't sound mocking, genuinely interested. "Most young ladies I know find country life deadly dull." "Most young ladies you know probably haven't lived much in the country," Cordelia interjected. "Town life is only exciting if you can afford to do it properly. Otherwise, it's just expensive and exhausting." Hartley laughed. "Fair point, Miss Grey. I stand corrected." The conversation expanded to include others, talk of London versus country, the merits of various estates, upcoming events in town that most of them would miss while at Greymont. Hartley had an easy way of drawing people out, asking questions that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. Thea noticed he didn't ask her many, not out of rudeness, more like he'd sensed she preferred listening to performing. She also noticed that Cassian had yet to address a single remark in her direction. He spoke to Lady Vivian about music. Apparently she'd studied in Vienna. He asked Miss Hartwell about her family's estate in the north. He even engaged briefly with the Dalton sisters about a play they'd seen in London. But when Hartley turned the conversation toward Thea, asking about her impressions of the gardens, Cassian went silent, lifted his wineglass, studied it as if the contents required intense concentration. It was such a small thing, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. Thea was watching. "The East Gardens are particularly fine," she said, keeping her voice light. "Miss Grey and I walked there this morning. We encountered His Highness and Lord Hartley, in fact." "Did you?" Lady Vivian's tone suggested mild interest, but her gaze sharpened. "How fortunate?" "Briefly," Hartley said easily. "We were heading back to the house. Though I admit I was tempted to linger, the company was far more appealing than estate business." He smiled at Cordelia, then Thea, friendly, uncomplicated. Cassian set down his wineglass with slightly more force than necessary. "Lord Hartley is too kind," Lady Ashford said. "Though I'm sure the young ladies appreciated the encounter. It's always pleasant to make new acquaintances." The conversation shifted again. Thea focused on her food and tried to ignore the awareness prickling at the back of her neck, the sense that she was being observed, even though every time she glanced toward the head of the table, Cassian was looking elsewhere. After luncheon, Hartley took his leave with promises to call again soon. The women drifted toward the drawing room for the afternoon's prescribed activities: needlework, reading, whatever would occupy them until dinner. Thea excused herself with a headache that wasn't entirely fabricated. Her temples had started throbbing halfway through lunch. She retreated to her rooms and found a book on her bedside table that hadn't been there that morning. A volume of poetry. Byron. Worn around the edges, clearly well read. There was no note. Thea picked it up carefully, opened to a random page. Someone had marked a passage with a faint pencil line. "She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. And all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the book. It meant nothing. Lady Ashford had probably instructed servants to leave reading material in all the rooms. That was all. Except this particular volume felt personal, chosen rather than assigned. She set it back on the table and moved to the window, looking down at the gardens where she'd walked that morning. Empty now. Peaceful. A figure emerged from the house below. She recognized him instantly. Cassian, heading toward the same path she and Cordelia had taken earlier. He stopped at the fountain, stood there with that same stillness she'd seen last night. Then he turned, looked up toward her window. Thea stepped back instinctively, heart hammering. Had he seen her? She couldn't tell from this distance. When she dared to look again, he was gone. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. Confusion. Definitely confusion. But underneath it, something else. Something that felt dangerously like anticipation. She pulled the curtain closed and told herself to stop being foolish. But that night, she fell asleep with the poetry book on her nightstand and didn't dream of funerals at all. Chapter 3. The book disappeared 3 days later. Thea noticed when she returned from breakfast, intending to read the marked passage again, not because it meant anything, but because the words had been circling her mind at odd moments. The nightstand was empty. Her maid claimed to know nothing about it when asked. Perhaps she'd imagined the pencil mark. Perhaps Lady Ashford had recalled her lending library. Perhaps it had never been meant for her at all. She tried not to think about it. This proved easier said than done. Greymont had a way of making hours stretch, each day structured so carefully that time itself felt controlled. Morning walks, afternoon lessons, evening entertainment, all of it pleasant, all of it numbing. Thea learned that Miss Hartwell painted watercolours beautifully, but never spoke unless directly addressed. That the Dalton sisters had been summoned because their father had invested poorly in a venture tied to the Marchmont scandal. That Lady Vivian's late husband had left her wealthy but without family protection. A dangerous combination for a woman still young enough to remarry. Everyone had reasons for being here. No one discussed them openly. She also learned that Cassian Rothwell kept country hours that conveniently avoided most social gatherings. He appeared at dinner, occasionally at breakfast, though he sat at the far end of the table with paperwork beside his plate, clearly working while eating. He never joined them for afternoon activities. When Lord Hartley visited, which he did with increasing frequency, Cassian would greet him, exchange a few words, then disappear into his study. "His Highness takes his responsibilities seriously," Lady Ashford said when Cordelia remarked on his absence one afternoon. They were in the music room, pretending to practice. "Estate management requires constant attention." "My father manages 3 estates and still finds time for luncheon," Cordelia muttered, too quietly for Lady Ashford to hear. Thea said nothing. She'd stopped expecting Cassian's attendance anywhere. What she hadn't stopped noticing was the way things appeared and disappeared around her with no explanation. A shawl she'd admired in passing was delivered to her room the next day. Lady Ashford's generosity, apparently, though Thea had mentioned it to no one but Cordelia. The drafty corner of the library where she preferred to read suddenly had a screen positioned to block the window's chill. Her morning tea arrived exactly as she liked it. Weak, no sugar, though she'd never specified preferences to her maid. Small things. Forgettable things. Except they weren't random. Someone was paying attention. On Thursday, the drawing master arrived. Mr. Felton was older, patient, and possessed the particular kindness of teachers who genuinely enjoyed their subject. He set them to sketching a still life arranged on a table by the window. Fruit, flowers, the usual objects meant to teach light and shadow. Thea had no talent for drawing. Her apple looked misshapen. Her attempt at grapes resembled a collection of mismatched stones. "You're being too careful," Mr. Felton said gently, pausing beside her. "Art requires confidence. Even if the line is wrong, make it with certainty." Easy to say. Harder to do when you'd spent years learning that mistakes drew attention you couldn't afford. She tried again. The apple still looked wrong, but at least it looked decisively wrong. Across the room, Lady Vivian was producing something that actually resembled the arrangement. Miss Hartwell's work was delicate, precise. Even Cordelia, who claimed to despise drawing, had managed something passable. Thea was about to abandon her apple entirely when the door opened. Cassian entered, clearly not expecting to find the room occupied. He stopped just inside the threshold. "Forgive me, I didn't realize—" "Your Highness?" Mr. Felton bowed. "We're just finishing for the day. Please don't let us disturb you." "Not at all." Cassian's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on each woman's work, the way someone might catalogue inventory. When he reached Thea's easel, something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, not quite sympathy. He looked away before she could be certain she'd seen anything at all. "I came for a book," he said. "I'll return later." "The library is better stocked, Your Highness," Lady Ashford suggested. "If you're looking for something specific—" "I know what I'm looking for." "Thank you." He crossed to a shelf near the window, scanned the spines with practiced efficiency, and withdrew a slim volume. Thea couldn't see the title from where she sat. "Carry on," he said, already moving toward the door. And then he was gone. The whole encounter had lasted perhaps 2 minutes. "He's very dedicated to his reading," Miss Hartwell observed quietly. "Among other things," Lady Vivian murmured, setting down her charcoal. Mr. Felton cleared his throat. "Ladies, shall we review your work before we conclude?" That evening, Thea found the poetry book on her nightstand again. Same worn edges, same pages marked with faint pencil. But this time, there was a second mark, a different passage, several pages from the first. "There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't random. Someone was marking specific passages. Someone wanted her to read them. She turned to the front of the book, looking for an inscription that might identify the owner. Found it on the title page, in handwriting she didn't recognize. C.R. Cassian Rothwell. She closed the book quickly, as if she'd been caught reading something forbidden. Why would he leave this for her? He barely spoke to her, could barely look at her during meals. Disappeared whenever possible. Unless... The thought arrived unwelcome. Unless he can't speak to me, but wants me to understand something anyway. She opened the book again. Read both marked passages carefully, trying to find meaning in the selection. Beauty, solitude, places where society's rules didn't intrude. It could mean anything. Or nothing. Thea set the book aside and prepared for bed. But sleep felt impossible. Her mind turned over the possibilities, discarded each one, started again. Finally, near midnight, she lit a candle and retrieved paper from her writing desk. If he was leaving messages in poetry, she could respond in kind. She didn't have poetry to mark, but she had words. "I don't understand," she wrote. Simple, direct. Then crossed it out. Too bold, too presumptuous. What if she was wrong? What if the book was coincidence, and she was inventing patterns where none existed? She started again. "Thank you for the book. Neutral. Safe. If he'd meant nothing by it, this acknowledged the gesture without reading too much into it. If he'd meant something, well, he'd know she'd noticed. She folded the paper, small enough to slip between pages, marked the place carefully, and left the book on her nightstand, where her maid would find it in the morning. Either it would be collected along with items for laundering, or it would remain. She'd have her answer by tomorrow. The next morning, the book was gone. Thea tried not to watch for Cassian at breakfast, failed completely. He didn't appear. Lord Hartley did, arriving just as they were finishing to invite anyone interested in a ride through the countryside. Several women accepted immediately, the Dalton sisters, Miss Hartwell, even Lady Vivian, though she made a show of needing to change into proper riding attire first. Miss Brennan? Hartley turned to her with that easy smile. Do you ride? Not well, Thea admitted. We'll find you a gentle mount. The countryside is worth seeing, and the weather won't hold much longer. Come, it'll be good to get away from the house for a few hours. She hesitated. She hadn't ridden in years, and the idea of looking incompetent in front of half their party held no appeal. But the alternative was sitting indoors, with her thoughts circling endlessly around marked poetry and disappeared notes. All right, she said. Give me 20 minutes to change. The stables at Greymont were as impressive as everything else. Spacious, clean, horses that looked better bred than most people. Hartley was waiting with a groom when Thea arrived, already mounted on a bay gelding that suited him. This is Clover, the groom said, leading forward a grey mare with kind eyes. Gentle as they come, miss. You'll be safe with her. Thea let herself be helped into the saddle. Grateful Clover seemed content to stand still while she found her seat. It had been too long. Everything felt awkward. The reins, her posture, the strange height of being mounted. The others were already gathering in the yard. Lady Vivian looked elegant, even in riding clothes. The Dalton sisters chattered excitedly. Miss Hartwell sat her horse with quiet competence. Ready? Hartley brought his gelding alongside Clover. We'll take it slow. I promise not to lose anyone. They set off at an easy walk, following a path that led away from the house toward open country. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of day that felt like a promise winter might eventually end. Hartley kept his horse near Thea's, making conversation that didn't require much response. He pointed out landmarks, a folly on the neighbouring estate, the stream that marked Greymont's boundary, a stand of trees that apparently produced excellent pheasants in season. You're doing well, he said after they'd been riding for 20 minutes, for someone who claims not to ride well. Clover deserves the credit. I'm just trying not to fall off. He laughed. I doubt that. You have good hands. The mare trusts you. They crested a small hill, and the view opened up. Rolling fields, patches of woodland, the village of Greymont visible in the distance. Beautiful and impersonal, the way wealth often was. Do you miss London? Hartley asked. Thea considered lying, decided against it. Not particularly. My family never kept a house there. We visited when necessary, but I was never comfortable in town. Too much performance? She glanced at him, surprised. Exactly that. I understand completely. Half my time in London is spent pretending to care about things that bore me to tears. He smiled. Country life suits me better. Less pretense. More space to be honestly dull. You don't seem dull. You're kind to say so, but I assure you, left to my own devices, I'm devastatingly ordinary. I like horses, dislike cards, and find most political debate tedious. He paused. This is usually the point where young ladies decide I'm not worth pursuing. Is that why you're here? Thea asked before she could stop herself. At Greymont? Pursuing young ladies? Honestly? Hartley's expression turned more serious. I was invited. His Highness suggested I might enjoy the company while I was in the area. I suspect he's matchmaking. Subtly, but still. And I can't say I mind. The company has been excellent. He didn't specify which company in particular. Thea told herself it was presumptuous to assume he meant her. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Ahead, the Dalton sisters were attempting to get their horses to trot, with mixed success. Lady Vivian maintained perfect form beside them. Miss Hartwell had drifted slightly away from the group, clearly more comfortable alone. May I ask you something? Hartley's voice was careful. You don't have to answer. You can ask. Your brother, Kit Brennan. I knew of him slightly. Good man. I was sorry to hear about his death. He paused. Is it difficult, being here? Given Prince Cassian's connection to what happened? Thea's hands tightened on the reins. Clover tossed her head slightly. I don't know what his connection was, she said quietly. No one explained it to me. Ah. Hartley looked uncomfortable now. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Forgive me. It's fine. Everyone's wondering anyway. Why Kit's sister is here under the Crown's protection when the circumstances of his death were never made clear. You're just honest enough to ask directly. That's generous of you. They'd reached the edge of the woods. The path narrowed, forcing them into single file. Hartley gestured for Thea to go ahead. Behind them, someone called out, one of the Dalton sisters, laughing about something. The sound carried oddly in the cold air. Thea didn't realize how tense she'd been until they emerged from the trees and the path widened again. Hartley brought his horse alongside hers once more. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I think His Highness... He stopped, started again. I think grief makes people complicated. In my experience, the ones who feel it most deeply are often the worst at expressing it. Thea looked at him. Are you defending him? Trying to understand him, maybe. Though I'll admit, his behavior toward you doesn't make sense to me either. What do you mean? Hartley hesitated. He asks about you, whenever I visit. What you've said, what you've done, whether you seem comfortable here. But he won't approach you directly. I assumed at first it was protocol, maintaining propriety. But it's more than that. Thea's chest felt tight. He asks about me? Constantly. It's half our conversation sometimes. Hartley smiled ruefully. I'm beginning to think I was invited here less for matchmaking and more as an intelligence source. Before Thea could respond, the group ahead stopped. Lady Vivian had turned her horse back toward them. Lord Hartley, we're debating whether to continue to the village or return. What do you advise? Return, I think. We've been out nearly 2 hours. Don't want to exhaust the horses or our welcome with Lady Ashford. They turned back toward Greymont. Thea let Clover fall slightly behind, needing space to think. Cassian asked about her, questioned Hartley about her comfort, her activities, but couldn't speak to her himself. The contradiction made her head ache. When they returned to the stables, a groom was already waiting to take the horses. Thea dismounted gratefully, her legs unsteady after so long in the saddle. You did beautifully, Hartley said, coming to stand beside her. Clover clearly approves. I'll be sore tomorrow, but it was worth it. Thank you for suggesting it. We should ride again, if you'd like. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. His expression was open, hopeful in a way that was entirely uncomplicated. He liked her, genuinely, and not because of family connections or political advantage. It should have felt flattering. It did, in a way. But all she could think was, does Cassian know he's here? That we rode together? I'd like that, she said, because it would be rude to refuse, and because Hartley deserved better than being used as a measuring stick for someone else's attention. They walked back toward the house together. The others had gone ahead, leaving them alone on the path. Miss Brennan? Thea, if I may? She nodded, though the familiarity felt strange. I know we've only just become acquainted, but I want you to know, if you need anything while you're here, an ally, a friend, someone to speak plainly with, I'm available. His sincerity was almost painful. That's very kind. It's also selfish, he admitted with a slight smile. I find I enjoy your company more than anyone else's. You don't perform. They'd reached the house. Hartley bowed, proper and formal now that they might be observed. Until tomorrow, then. Thea watched him leave, then climbed the stairs to her room. The poetry book was back on her nightstand. She picked it up with trembling hands. The note she'd left was gone, but there was a new mark, a third passage near the end of the volume. I have not loved the world, nor the world me. I have not flattered its rank breath, nor bowed to its idolatries a patient knee. Her throat felt tight. This wasn't about beauty or solitude. This was about isolation, about choosing distance over dishonesty. She sat on the edge of her bed, book in her lap, and finally understood. He wasn't cold because he didn't care. He was cold because he cared too much and didn't know what to do with it. The realization should have brought relief. Instead, it made everything infinitely more complicated. Chapter 4. The estate planning committee met every Tuesday in the small salon overlooking the south lawn. Thea learned this when Lady Ashford announced at breakfast that she'd been volunteered. Prince Cassian requested someone with a practical mind, Lady Ashford said, as if this explained everything. You managed your household accounts after your father's passing, did you not? Thea's fingers tightened around her teacup. Her father hadn't passed. He'd retreated into grief after Kit died and left the bills to pile up unopened. She'd sorted through them, prioritized what could be paid, negotiated extensions on the rest. Not because she had any particular skill with numbers, but because someone had to. I did, she said carefully. Excellent. The committee reviews expenditures and coordinates estate improvements. Nothing too demanding. You'll meet at 10. Cordelia caught her eye across the table, mouthing sorry with an exaggerated grimace. Thea excused herself to change into something more appropriate for a business meeting. Her hands shook slightly as she fastened the buttons on her grey morning dress. This was fine. Professional. She'd sit quietly, review whatever needed reviewing, and leave. The fact that Cassian would be there was irrelevant. Except it wasn't, because he was the one who'd requested her specifically. She arrived at the salon at precisely 10 and found 3 people already seated around a table covered in ledgers and papers. An older gentleman she didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with ink-stained fingers, and Cassian. He looked up when she entered. Their eyes met for perhaps half a second before he stood, expression carefully neutral. Miss Brennan, thank you for joining us. His voice was exactly as it had been at every other brief encounter, polite, measured, revealing nothing. Your Highness, she curtsied, though it felt absurd in such an informal setting. May I introduce Mr. Davies, my land steward, and Mrs. Pemberton, who oversees household accounts. Cassian gestured to each in turn. They've been reviewing the quarterly expenditures and had questions about certain allocations. Mrs. Pemberton smiled warmly. Don't look so frightened, dear. We just need someone to verify our arithmetic isn't complete nonsense. Fresh eyes help. Thea took the seat indicated, directly across from Cassian, which felt like either terrible planning or deliberate cruelty. Mr. Davies slid a ledger toward her. The issue is with the greenhouse repairs. We budgeted for basic maintenance, but His Highness ordered additional improvements that weren't in the original estimate. I want to ensure the increased costs are justified before allocating funds. What improvements? Thea asked, focusing on the numbers rather than the man watching her from across the table. Heating system upgrades, Cassian said. The current setup is inefficient. Several of the more delicate plants died last winter. Plants are expensive, Mrs. Pemberton added. Replacing them costs more than preventing their death in the first place. Thea scanned the columns. The numbers were clear enough. Original estimate, revised costs, projected savings. The math supports the expense, she said. Assuming the new system lasts more than 3 years, you'll recover the additional investment through reduced plant replacement costs alone. That's what I argued, Cassian said quietly. Mr. Davies sighed. Very well, I'm outvoted, though I still think the boiler could have waited another season. The boiler failed twice last winter, Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. Once during a frost that killed half the orchids. I'm with His Highness on this one. They moved through other items. Roof repairs on tenant cottages, fence replacement along the north pasture, a request from the village for funds to repair the church bell tower. Each discussion followed the same pattern. Mr. Davies presenting concerns, Mrs. Pemberton offering context, Cassian asking careful questions. He never looked directly at Thea, but she felt his attention like weight. What about the library expansion? Mrs. Pemberton asked, shuffling papers. That's been pending approval for months. Postpone it, Cassian said. But Your Highness. The tenant cottages take priority. The library can wait. Mr. Davies looked pleased. Mrs. Pemberton looked like she wanted to argue, but knew better. Thea spoke without thinking. What needs expanding? All three turned to her. She'd been silent for the past 20 minutes, reviewing numbers while they debated. Speaking now drew focus she didn't want. The East Wing collection, Cassian said after a pause. It's outgrown the current shelving. Books are being stored in crates rather than catalogued properly. Can't you just add shelves to the existing space? Not without blocking the windows. The room needs additional square footage. What about the music room? The words came faster now, before she could second-guess them. It's rarely used in the mornings. If you installed shelving along one wall, you could create overflow space without construction costs. Silence. Mrs. Pemberton leaned forward. That's actually brilliant. It's a compromise, Mr. Davies said, though he didn't sound opposed. Not ideal, but functional. Cassian was looking at her now, properly looking, not the glancing awareness she'd felt all morning. His expression was difficult to read. The music room is used for lessons, he said. Twice a week, Thea counted. And the wall opposite the windows is entirely empty. Shelving there wouldn't interfere with the pianoforte or seating. You've noticed the room's layout. It wasn't quite a question. Thea felt heat rise in her face. I notice most rooms. Habit? The corner of his mouth might have moved. She couldn't be certain. We'll explore the option, he said finally. Mrs. Pemberton, coordinate with the carpenter to get estimates. They continued for another hour. Thea contributed occasionally. Small observations, questions about efficiency, once catching an arithmetic error that would have resulted in overpayment. Each time she spoke, Cassian's attention sharpened, though he never commented directly on her suggestions. When Mr. Davies finally declared the meeting concluded, Thea stood quickly. "Thank you for your assistance, Miss Brennan," Mrs. Pemberton said. "You've been tremendously helpful. I hope you'll join us again next week." Of course. Though her chest felt tight at the prospect. Mr. Davies and Mrs. Pemberton gathered their papers and left, still debating something about drainage systems. Thea moved toward the door. "Miss Brennan." She stopped, turned. Cassian stood by the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair. The careful neutrality had cracked slightly. She could see tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers pressed against the wood. "Your suggestion about the music room. It was well considered." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. He seemed to be struggling with something, words forming and dissolving before reaching speech. "I should—" Thea gestured vaguely toward the door. "Wait." The word came sharp, almost rough. He cleared his throat. "Please." She waited. He moved around the table, closing half the distance between them before stopping. Still too far for comfort, too close for propriety. "The committee work. If it's unwelcome, I can arrange—" "It's not unwelcome," she said quickly. Another pause. His jaw worked, as if physically restraining words that wanted out. "You're settling in well?" he asked finally. "Here at Greymont?" The question was so ordinary, so careful, that it felt worse than his silence. "Well enough." "And Lord Hartley, he's been—" Cassian stopped, started again. "He seems attentive." Thea's pulse jumped. "He's been kind." Of course, he would be. Something bitter threaded through the words. He's good at that. Good at kindness? Good at being uncomplicated. Cassian's gaze was fixed somewhere past her shoulder. At saying what he means without calculation? The air felt thick. Thea struggled to keep her voice steady. "Is there something you want to ask me, Your Highness?" His eyes snapped to hers. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something raw there. Something that looked like longing, wrapped in restraint. Then it was gone. "No," he said quietly. "Nothing that would be appropriate." Her hands fisted in her skirts. "Why did you request me for the committee?" "You have a practical mind. Mrs. Pemberton needed assistance." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give." The frustration that had been building for weeks crystallized into something sharp. "You can't even look at me during meals. You leave rooms I enter. But you ask about me constantly," Lord Hartley told me. "You leave me books with marked passages and then take them back without explanation. What am I supposed to understand from that?" Cassian went very still. "Hartley told you I ask about you." "He thought I should know?" "Of course he did." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "He would think that was the honourable thing?" "Was it not?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him. "I don't know what the honourable thing is anymore where you're concerned." Thea's breath caught. "Where I'm concerned." He took a step back, as if proximity was dangerous. "This conversation is inappropriate. I apologize." "Stop apologizing and just speak plainly." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because—" He cut himself off sharply, turned away. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Your brother was my closest friend. When he died, I made promises to myself about what I owed his memory. Those promises don't allow for certain complications. I'm a complication. You're Kit's sister. He said it like a conviction, not a fact. You deserve better than a man who failed to protect him. The words hit like cold water. You think you failed Kit? I know I did. How? That's not... He stopped, drew a breath. This conversation is over. Your Highness? Please. He finally looked at her again, and the rawness was back, unguarded for just a second. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Thea wanted to push, wanted to demand explanations, to force him past whatever wall he'd built. But something in his expression stopped her. Not coldness now, but pain barely contained. All right, she said softly. He nodded once, stiff and formal. The committee meets Tuesdays at 10. I hope you'll continue to attend. I will. She left before he could say anything else. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she reached her room. That afternoon, Cordelia found her in the library, staring at a book she hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. You look miserable, Cordelia said, settling into the chair beside her. What happened? Estate committee meeting? That dull? Complicated. Thea closed the book. How do you know when someone's being deliberately difficult versus genuinely unable to be otherwise? Cordelia tilted her head. Context would help. Thea couldn't explain without revealing too much. Never mind. I'm just tired. Well, here's something to cheer you. Lord Hartley invited us all to his estate tomorrow for a luncheon party. Lady Ashford has already approved it. Apparently she thinks we need more social interaction. Cordelia rolled her eyes. As if we're not socially interacting every single day here. That sounds nice, Thea said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. You don't have to come if you'd rather hide here with your thoughts. No, I'll come. Sitting at Greymont feeling sorry for herself would change nothing. Cordelia studied her for a moment. You know, if you ever want to talk about things you can't talk about, I'm excellent at listening without actually needing to understand what's being said. Despite everything, Thea smiled. Thank you. That's what friends are for. Well, that and providing distraction from whatever makes that look appear on your face. Cordelia stood, smoothing her skirts. Come on. Lady Vivienne is teaching us a card game she learned in Vienna. I suspect she's only doing it so she can win all our pin money, but it'll be more entertaining than brooding. Thea let herself be pulled from the library, but that evening, when she returned to her room, the poetry book was waiting again. This time there was no marked passage. Instead, tucked between the pages, a single sentence written in unfamiliar handwriting on plain paper. I wish I could answer your questions honestly. Forgive me for being a coward. No signature. None needed. Thea pressed the paper flat, reading it 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in the back of her journal. An apology. An admission. Not enough, but more than she'd expected. She didn't write back, but she didn't return the book either. Chapter 5. Riversdale, Lord Hartley's estate, was smaller than Greymont, but warmer somehow, less imposing, more lived in. The kind of house that suggested comfort over grandeur, though it was grand enough by any reasonable measure. Their party arrived just before noon in 2 carriages. Lady Ashford had insisted on the propriety of numbers. All 8 women, herself as chaperone, even Sir Gregory Weston, who'd been visiting Greymont and accepted Hartley's invitation with apparent relief at having something to do. Prince Cassian had declined. Estate business, Lady Ashford explained, though her tone suggested she found the excuse wearing thin. Thea told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief. Hartley met them at the entrance, looking genuinely pleased to have a house full of guests. "Welcome, all of you. I've had luncheon set up in the conservatory. The weather's too fine to waste indoors entirely." The conservatory was beautiful. Glass walls overlooking gardens still winter bare, but showing promise of spring. Tables had been arranged with what looked like careful casualness, food laid out in a way that invited grazing rather than formal dining. "No assigned seating," Hartley announced. "Eat what you like, sit where you please. I've never understood why meals need to be such regimented affairs." Lady Vivian laughed, the sound practiced, but not unpleasant. "How refreshingly uncivilized, Lord Hartley." "I prefer to think of it as practical. This way, no one's trapped beside someone dull for 2 hours." The group dispersed naturally. The Dalton sisters claimed a table near the windows. Miss Hartwell gravitated toward the quieter corner. Cordelia loaded a plate with more food than seemed physically possible for her to consume and settled onto a cushioned bench with a contented sigh. Thea took modest portions and found a seat at a small table slightly apart from the others, close enough to be social, far enough to avoid performing it. Hartley joined her within minutes. "May I?" he asked, though he was already pulling out the chair across from her. Of course. He'd brought wine, poured her a glass without asking, somehow knowing she'd want it. That easy attention to detail that seemed effortless for him. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure anyone would accept. Greymont is far more impressive than anything I can offer." "Greymont is beautiful," Thea said carefully, "but beauty can be exhausting." "Can it?" He looked genuinely curious. "When it's constant, when there's no room for anything less than perfection." She paused, wondering if she was saying too much. "Your house feels kinder?" "Kinder." He smiled. "I'll take that as the compliment it's meant to be." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Around them, conversation flowed. Lady Vivian holding court with Sir Gregory and 2 of the other women, Cordelia making Miss Hartwell laugh at something, the general pleasant noise of people enjoying themselves. "May I ask you something?" Hartley set down his fork. "And you're welcome to tell me it's none of my business." Thea braced herself. "Go ahead." "Are you happy at Greymont?" Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "I'm comfortable." "That's not the same thing." "No," she admitted. "It's not." He studied her for a moment. "You don't have to stay, you know. You could leave, visit family, make other arrangements." "Could I?" Thea kept her voice light, but the question was genuine. "We were summoned by the Crown. I assumed that meant—" "You're not prisoners. Wards under protection, yes. But if you wanted to leave, I don't think anyone would stop you." He paused. "Well, Lady Ashford might write a sternly worded letter." Despite herself, Thea smiled. "A fate worse than death." "Precisely." Hartley leaned back in his chair. "I only mention it because you seem— I don't know, like you're waiting for something that hasn't arrived yet." The observation was too close to true. Thea looked down at her plate, moving food around without eating it. "I'm sorry," Hartley said quickly. "That was presumptuous." It was perceptive. Sometimes those are the same thing. She looked up at him, really looked. He had an open face, the kind that didn't hide much. Right now it showed concern, interest, and something else she didn't want to name. "Lord Hartley," Owen, he corrected gently. We've ridden together, survived Lady Ashford's scrutiny together, and you've now visited my home. I think we can dispense with formality. Owen. The name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar, too easy. Why are you being so kind to me? He blinked, clearly surprised by the question. Why wouldn't I be? Most people have reasons, calculations. Ah. He nodded slowly. You've spent too much time in society, made you cynical. Made me realistic. Fair enough. He topped up her wineglass, his own. Then let me be realistic in return. I like you. I enjoy your company. You don't simper or perform or say things you don't mean just because they're expected. That's rare. Especially in, he gestured vaguely, all of this. All of this? The season. Courtship. The elaborate dance everyone pretends isn't happening while it absolutely is happening. He grimaced. I've never been good at pretending. That must make social situations difficult. Impossible, usually, but refreshing when I find someone else who's equally bad at it. He raised his glass slightly. To honesty among the hopelessly awkward. Thea touched her glass to his. To honesty. They drank, and for a moment it felt simple, uncomplicated. Exactly what Owen had promised. Then she saw movement beyond the conservatory windows. A figure on horseback, approaching from the direction of Greymont. Even at a distance, she recognized the rider's posture, the controlled way he sat his mount. Cassian. Her stomach dropped. Owen followed her gaze. Ah, His Highness decided to join us after all. So it seems. He mentioned he might. Owen's tone was carefully neutral. Estate business concluded earlier than expected, apparently. The horse and rider drew closer. Cassian was dressed for riding, dark coat, boots that looked like they'd actually been used rather than just polished. He moved with the easy competence of someone who'd grown up on horseback. He dismounted near the main entrance, handing his reins to a groom who'd appeared from somewhere. Even from here, Thea could see the tension in his shoulders. Shall we go greet him? Owen asked, already standing. Thea didn't want to. Wanted to stay exactly where she was, hidden in the conservatory with her wine and her temporary peace. But standing would draw more attention than going. Of course. They met Cassian in the entrance hall. He'd removed his riding gloves, but still looked windswept, his hair slightly disordered in a way that made him seem younger, more human. Your Highness. Owen bowed. What a pleasant surprise. Hartley. Cassian's gaze flicked to Thea, away again. I apologize for arriving uninvited. Nonsense. You're always welcome. Owen's ease was genuine, unforced. We've just started luncheon. The conservatory. You remember it? I do. An awkward pause. Thea stood frozen, uncertain whether to curtsy, speak, or simply disappear. Miss Brennan and I were just finishing our meal. Owen continued, apparently unbothered by the tension crackling through the space. But there's plenty of food. Come, let me get you settled. He was already walking, assuming they'd follow. Cassian hesitated for just a moment before falling into step. Thea trailed behind, feeling like an intruder in a conversation she wasn't part of. The conservatory's pleasant hum of activity faltered slightly when they entered with the prince. Not silence, too practiced for that, but a subtle shift in energy, awareness, rippling through the room. Lady Ashford rose. Your Highness, how wonderful that you could join us. Lady Ashford, Cassian inclined his head. Forgive the intrusion. Not at all. Please, help yourself to refreshment. He didn't move toward the food. His attention swept the room, cataloguing, assessing, before landing on Thea and Owen's abandoned table. You were dining, he said to Owen. Don't let me interrupt. You're not interrupting, Owen said easily. Join us. Miss Brennan won't mind the company. Will you, Miss Brennan? Every eye in the room was suddenly on her. Thea felt heat crawl up her neck. Of course not, she managed. They returned to the small table. Owen claimed his original seat. Cassian took the third chair, positioned between them but somehow apart, the geometry awkward. A servant appeared with wine for Cassian. He accepted it, but didn't drink. How was your ride? Owen asked. Uneventful. Good weather for it. Indeed. The conversation was excruciating. Owen tried gamely to fill the silences, asking about Greymont's stables, mentioning a horse he'd recently acquired, making observations about the upcoming hunting season. Cassian responded in monosyllables. His attention kept drifting, to the windows, to the other guests, to the wine glass he turned between his fingers. Never to Thea. She might as well have been furniture. Miss Brennan mentioned she's helping with the estate committee, Owen said, clearly grasping for topics. That must be valuable, having practical insight. It is, Cassian said. She caught an arithmetic error that would have cost you, apparently. She did. Owen's easy manner was starting to fray. Perhaps you should recruit her permanently. God knows estate management could use more people who actually pay attention to details. Perhaps. Silence fell again. Thea stared at her plate, willing herself invisible. This was torture. Sitting between them. Owen with his genuine warmth, Cassian with his careful distance. Feeling the weight of what wasn't being said, pressing down on all of them. Your Highness, Lady Vivian called from across the room. Sir Gregory was just telling us about Vienna. Didn't you visit there 2 years ago? Perhaps you could settle a debate about the opera house? Relief flashed across Cassian's face. Excuse me. He stood, crossed to join Lady Vivian and Sir Gregory without a backward glance. Owen watched him go, expression thoughtful, then turned to Thea. Well, he said quietly, that was spectacularly uncomfortable. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't do anything. He paused. Though I am beginning to understand the situation better than I did this morning. Thea's chest tightened. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle, not accusing. It's all right, Thea. I'm not offended. There's nothing to be offended by. Isn't there? He smiled, but it was sad. He rode here, from Greymont. That's nearly 40 minutes each way. Estate business doesn't conclude at the exact moment to allow arrival at luncheon. Maybe he was invited. He was. I invited him 3 days ago. He declined. Owen refilled her wine glass. Then he shows up the moment his wards are here, specifically the moment you're here. You can't know that. Can't I? He wasn't looking at her now, but at Cassian across the room. I've known him for years, watched him navigate society, manage expectations, maintain that perfect control. I've never seen him ride 40 minutes to change his mind about luncheon. Thea couldn't respond. Her throat felt too tight. The question, Owen continued softly, is whether you feel the same way. I don't. She stopped, started again. It doesn't matter what I feel. Of course it matters. Not if nothing can come of it. Owen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was kind but firm. Thea, look at me. She did, reluctantly. I like you, genuinely, and I think in different circumstances we could make each other quite happy. He paused. But I'm not interested in being the safe choice someone makes because the choice they actually want is unavailable. That's not. It is, and it's all right. He reached across the table, squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it. I'd rather know now than 6 months into a courtship neither of us can escape gracefully. Shame burned through her. I never meant to mislead you. You didn't. I misled myself. His smile turned wry. Hazard of being an optimist. We always think things will work out the way we hope, rather than the way they're actually heading. I'm sorry. Don't be. But do me one favor? Anything. Figure out what you actually want, not what's appropriate or expected or safe. What you want. He gestured subtly toward where Cassian stood with Lady Vivian. And then decide if you're willing to fight for it. Before Thea could respond, Cordelia appeared at their table. Sorry to interrupt, but Lady Ashford is making noises about departing soon. Something about the weather turning? She glanced between them. Everything all right? Fine, Owen said, standing smoothly. Just solving the world's problems over wine. The usual. He excused himself to see to his other guests. Cordelia slid into his vacated seat. What was that about? Nothing. That didn't look like nothing. That looked like a very serious conversation ending awkwardly. Cordelia leaned closer. Did he propose? Because if he did and you refused, you're either very brave or very foolish, and I haven't decided which. He didn't propose, but he wanted to. Thea didn't answer. Cordelia sighed. You're in love with Prince Cassian. I'm not. Thea stopped. There was no point denying it to Cordelia. I don't know what I am. Well, figure it out quickly, because this situation is becoming increasingly obvious to everyone with eyes. Cordelia glanced across the room. Including him, I suspect. Thea followed her gaze. Cassian was still with Lady Vivian and Sir Gregory, but his posture had changed. Stiffer, more controlled. As if he was forcing himself to stay exactly where he was. We should prepare to leave, Thea said quietly. Probably. They rose together. Thea gathered her things, said gracious goodbyes to Owen, thanked him for his hospitality with words that felt hollow. His response was warm, but distant now. Polite. The easy friendship they'd been building had shifted into something more formal. She'd lost that, and hadn't even realized she'd wanted it until it was gone. The carriage ride back was subdued. Lady Ashford made occasional observations about Hartley's excellent hospitality. The Dalton sisters discussed the food. No one mentioned Cassian, who'd left separately on horseback before the carriages departed. Thea stared out the window and tried not to think about Owen's parting words. Figure out what you actually want. She wanted impossible things. She wanted Cassian to look at her the way he'd looked at her during the committee meeting, focused, present, almost hungry for her thoughts. She wanted to understand what Kit's death had to do with his distance. She wanted the poetry to mean something instead of being beautiful nonsense exchanged by cowards. She wanted him to stop running. The carriages pulled up to Greymont as dusk was settling. Thea climbed out, legs stiff from sitting, and headed directly for her room. The poetry book was on her nightstand. Of course it was. She picked it up, half expecting another marked passage, another cryptic message. Instead, there was a note, longer this time, written on proper stationery. I have no right to ask this, but I am asking anyway. Tomorrow evening, the East Garden, 9 o'clock. I will understand if you don't come. C.R. Thea read it 3 times. Then she sat on her bed, heart pounding, and tried to decide if she was brave enough to meet him, or foolish enough. Cordelia's words echoed, very brave, or very foolish, and I haven't decided which. Neither had she. But when 9 o'clock came the next evening, she would find out. Chapter 6. Thea changed her dress 3 times before settling on the first one. This was ridiculous. It was a garden meeting, not a ball. And yet her hands shook as she fastened the buttons on the deep blue evening dress, the one Lady Ashford had provided her first night, the one that caught candlelight and made her look like someone worth noticing. She told herself that choice meant nothing. At 8:30, she slipped downstairs. Most of the household was in the drawing room. She could hear the pianoforte, laughter, the comfortable sounds of an evening winding down. Lady Ashford wouldn't miss her for an hour, maybe less, if this conversation went as badly as she suspected it might. The east garden was dark, except for moonlight. Someone had left the gate unlatched. Whether by design or accident, she couldn't tell. Her slippers crunched softly on gravel as she followed the path toward the fountain. He was already there. Cassian stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him in that familiar pose. He'd changed from riding clothes into evening dress, though he'd forgone the formality of a cravat. His collar was open at the throat in a way that felt almost vulnerable. He turned when he heard her approach. Whatever he'd been steeling himself for, rejection, perhaps, or her absence entirely, dissolved when he saw her. "You came," he said quietly. "You asked." "I had no right to." "No," she agreed. "You didn't." They stood several feet apart, the fountain burbling between them. Thea wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill, or perhaps against the weight of what was about to happen. "Thank you," Cassian said finally, "for coming. For—" He stopped, drew a breath. "I don't know where to start." "The beginning usually works." "The beginning was 6 years ago. You were 17. Kit brought me home for Christmas because my own family was—" He gestured vaguely. "Complicated. You barely spoke to me the entire visit." Thea blinked. She'd forgotten that Christmas, had buried it with everything else from that year, the last good year before things started falling apart. "I was terrified of you," she admitted. "Of me?" He looked genuinely surprised. "You were the crown prince, in our house, sitting at our table. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound foolish. You said plenty to Kit. I remember listening to you argue with him about a book. Some novel he thought was sentimental nonsense, and you insisted was actually quite clever." The corner of Cassian's mouth lifted slightly. "You won that argument, as I recall." "I don't remember that." "I do." His voice went quieter. "I remember thinking Kit was lucky to have a sister who challenged him, who wasn't afraid to tell him when he was being an idiot." The fountain's sound seemed louder in the silence that followed. "Why are you telling me this?" Thea asked. "Because you asked where to start, and that's where it started for me, not—" He cut himself off. "I noticed you then, peripherally, the way you notice sunlight through a window, present but not demanding attention. That's a very poetic way of saying I was forgettable." "No." The word came sharp. "You were the opposite of forgettable, but you were also Kit's younger sister, and I had responsibilities, expectations. It would have been inappropriate to—" He stopped again, frustration clear in the line of his shoulders. "I'm explaining this badly." "You're explaining it honestly. That's different." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had during the committee meeting, like she was a problem he desperately wanted to solve, but didn't know how. 3 years ago, he continued, Kit was investigating corruption tied to families close to the crown, families with significant influence. He asked me to help, to use my position to access information he couldn't reach on his own. Thea's chest tightened. And you helped him. I tried, but I was... Cassian's jaw worked. I was careful. Too careful. I didn't want to draw attention, didn't want to move too quickly and alert the people we were investigating. Kit wanted to act immediately. I counseled patience. What happened? He grew impatient with my caution, confronted one of the men directly without telling me. Cassian's voice had gone flat, rehearsed. Like he'd told himself this story so many times the emotion had worn smooth. There was an altercation. Kit was injured. Not badly, we thought. But the injury became infected. By the time the physicians realized how serious it was. He stopped, didn't finish. He didn't have to. You think you killed him? Thea said quietly. By being too cautious? I know I did. If I'd acted when he asked, if I'd been less concerned with protocol and more concerned with justice, he would have had the protection he needed. Instead, I counseled patience, and it cost him his life. The words hung between them, stark and terrible. Thea's hands had gone numb. Does my family know this? No. The official story was that Kit died in service to the crown, heroically, which was true in its way. But the details, your father was too deep in grief to press for them, and I... Cassian's voice cracked slightly. I couldn't face him, couldn't look him in the eye and explain that his son died, because I was too afraid to act. So you've been carrying this alone for 3 years. It seemed appropriate. Thea walked to the fountain's edge, needing something to do with her hands. The water was cold when she trailed her fingers through it. That's why you avoid me, she said. Not a question. Yes. Because I remind you of him. Because you are the living proof of what I cost your family. Every time I see you, I see what should have been. The life Kit should have lived. The sister he should have grown old annoying. Cassian moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence like heat. And I see... He stopped abruptly. Thea turned to face him. You see what? Things I have no right to see. Her pulse jumped. Such as? Thea. Her name, spoken like a warning. Like a plea. You asked me here, she said, holding his gaze. You wanted honesty, so be honest. I can't. Why not? Because... His control was fracturing. She could see it in the tension of his jaw, the white of his knuckles where his hands had fisted at his sides. Because some truths only make things worse. Worse than this. Than you fleeing rooms I enter and interrogating Lord Hartley about my welfare while refusing to speak to me directly. Her voice rose despite herself. Worse than poetry books appearing and disappearing with cryptic messages that explain nothing. Yes. The word was barely audible. Infinitely worse. I don't believe you. Then you're not thinking clearly. Neither are you, if you think this silence is sustainable. They were close now, close enough that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his breathing had gone shallow, close enough to be improper by any measure. I rode to Riversdale yesterday, Cassian said suddenly, voice rough. Told myself it was to be sociable, to show support for Hartley's hospitality. That was a lie. Why did you really go? Because the thought of you there without me was... He cut himself off with something that sounded almost like a laugh. Bitter, self-directed. I have no claim to you, none. And yet the idea of Hartley, of anyone, having the ease with you that I've denied myself. You're jealous, Thea breathed. Spectacularly. He said it like a confession. Pathetically. Of a man who's been nothing but kind and honourable. Who would be good for you in ways I... He stopped. I have no right to any of this. Stop telling me what rights you don't have and tell me what you want. The question hung between them. Cassian's eyes were very dark in the moonlight. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to stop pretending I don't notice every time you enter a room. I want to stop leaving before I can say something I can't take back. I want... He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying whatever order it had possessed. I want things that would be a betrayal of Kit's memory and your family's trust, and every promise I made to myself about what I owed the people I've failed. Those promises are destroying you. Good. I deserve to be destroyed. That's not... Thea's frustration crystallized into something sharp. Kit would hate this. What you're doing to yourself. To both of us. You don't know that. I know he valued honesty over martyrdom. I know he hated watching people punish themselves for things beyond their control. Her voice shook. And I know he loved you like a brother. If he were here, he'd tell you to stop being an idiot. Something cracked in Cassian's expression. Don't. Don't what? Tell you the truth you're too afraid to hear? Don't make this about what Kit would want. You don't know. I know he wouldn't want you suffering for his sake. I know he wouldn't want me caught in this purgatory of almosts and nevers. Her hands were shaking now. And I know that using his memory as an excuse for cowardice would enrage him. Cassian went very still. Cowardice? What else would you call it? Respect. Responsibility. Appropriate. Cowardice, she repeated, louder now. You're hiding behind guilt because it's easier than admitting you want something you've decided you can't have. Thea. Don't. She stepped back, suddenly exhausted. Don't explain again why this is impossible. I understand the reasons. I've memorized them. What I don't understand is why you asked me here if you weren't willing to do anything about it. I needed you to know... Know what? That you've been suffering nobly, that you notice me but refuse to act on it, that I should be grateful for marked poetry and stolen glances while you maintain your perfect control. She wrapped her arms around herself again. I didn't need to know any of that. It changes nothing. She turned to leave. His hand caught her wrist, gentle, barely any pressure, but enough to stop her. Wait. She didn't pull away, didn't turn back either. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. I am a coward. I am hiding. And I have been unfair to you in ways I... His voice roughened. In ways I can't justify. Then let me go. I can't. His thumb moved against her wrist, barely perceptible, probably unconscious. I've tried. For 3 years I've tried. And then you arrived here, and suddenly trying felt impossible. Thea's pulse hammered under his touch. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know how to do this. Any of this. His hand was still on her wrist, fingers warm despite the evening chill. I'm saying that every rule I've built to keep myself in check fails the moment you're near. I'm saying... He stopped. Drew a shaking breath. I'm saying please don't leave yet. Even if you should. Even if it would be better for both of us. Please. Slowly, Thea turned. He was closer than she'd realized, close enough that she could see the tension in every line of his body, the way his free hand was fisted at his side, as if physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "I don't know." "That's not an answer." "It's the only honest one I have." His eyes searched her face. "What do you want to happen?" The question was dangerous. Answering it honestly was more dangerous still. But she was tired of caution, tired of silence. "I want you to stop running," she said. "I want you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass or guilt. I want—" She cut herself off, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how his hand still circled her wrist, how his breathing had changed. "You want what?" His voice had dropped lower. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've never wanted anything like this before." Something shifted in his expression, heat replacing restraint, though the tension remained. "Thea?" Her name again. Different this time. "If you're going to leave, do it now, before you what?" "Before I stop being honorable about this." Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "And if I don't leave?" "Then I'm going to make a choice I've been trying not to make for 3 years." "What choice?" Instead of answering, he released her wrist, only to bring his hand up to her face. His palm cupped her jaw with devastating gentleness, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice rough. She couldn't. The word wouldn't form. His other hand came up, framing her face. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I've tried so hard," he whispered. "To do the right thing, to honor Kit's memory, to keep you safe from this, from me. I don't want to be safe from you." The words seemed to break something in him. He kissed her, not gently, not carefully. Like 3 years of restraint had finally shattered, and he was too far gone to rebuild it. Thea's hands found his coat, fisting in the fabric to keep herself steady. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, desperately, into the circle of his embrace. This wasn't poetry, wasn't careful or controlled, or anything close to proper. This was hunger, mutual and consuming and entirely inappropriate for a garden where anyone might see. Neither of them cared. When they finally broke apart, lungs demanding air, reality reasserting itself in cold increments, Cassian's hands were still in her hair, hers still clutching his coat. He stared at her, eyes wide, chest heaving. "That was—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "We shouldn't have—" "Don't," Thea said fiercely. "Don't you dare apologize." "I wasn't going to." His voice was shaking. "I was going to say we shouldn't have waited so long." Then he kissed her again. Chapter 7. Thea woke the next morning with her lips still tender. She touched them carefully, half convinced she'd dreamed the entire encounter. But no. Her dress still smelled faintly of his cologne, and when she'd finally returned to her room near midnight, her hair had been thoroughly disheveled despite her attempts to restore it. They'd kissed for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes. Broken apart. Kissed again. Each separation harder than the last, each reunion more desperate. He'd walked her back to the house eventually, keeping to the shadows. Stopped at the servants' entrance where she could slip inside unnoticed. "Tomorrow," he'd said, still holding her hand. "What about tomorrow?" "I don't know, but I need to see you." She'd nodded, incapable of refusing him anything in that moment. Now, in daylight, reason was reasserting itself with uncomfortable persistence. They'd kissed, repeatedly, passionately, in a garden where anyone could have stumbled across them, and they'd resolved precisely nothing. He still believed he'd failed Kit. She still didn't know what this, whatever this was, meant beyond mutual want, finally acknowledged. They were still trapped in impossible circumstances with no clear path forward. But her lips remembered his mouth. Her body remembered the feeling of his arms. And she couldn't quite summon the regret she knew she should feel. Breakfast was torture. Cassian wasn't there, probably for the best, given Thea's complete inability to school her expression into anything resembling normalcy. But his absence felt like a physical thing, a gap in the room that made concentrating on conversation impossible. "You look dreadful," Cordelia observed cheerfully, sliding into the seat beside her. "Didn't sleep?" "Not particularly?" Cordelia's gaze was too knowing. "Any particular reason?" "The mattress is uncomfortable." "The mattress? Right." Cordelia loaded her plate with an alarming amount of food. "Well, I hope the mattress issue resolves itself soon. You look like you've been awake worrying all night." Thea focused determinedly on her tea. Lady Vivian arrived, looking impeccable as always. She settled across from them with coffee and half a piece of toast, apparently surviving on elegance alone. "Good morning, ladies. Sleep well?" "Deeply," Cordelia lied smoothly. "You?" "Well enough." Lady Vivian's attention drifted to Thea. "You seem distracted, Miss Brennan." "Just tired." Lady Vivian sipped her coffee. "I hope nothing troubling is keeping you awake, though I suppose Greymont can feel rather intense sometimes. All of us confined here together. Very little privacy." There was something pointed in her tone. Thea couldn't tell if it was idle observation or calculated probe. "I find the house quite comfortable," she said carefully. "Of course you do." Lady Vivian smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "You've adapted remarkably well. Better than some of us, certainly." Before Thea could pass that statement, Lady Ashford entered with her usual air of benevolent authority. "Good morning, ladies. I trust everyone is well rested?" She didn't wait for answers. "His Highness has requested that all committee members meet this morning at 10. Miss Brennan, that includes you." Thea's stomach dropped. "Of course." "Excellent. And this afternoon we'll be receiving a special guest. The Dowager Duchess of Winters is visiting the area and has requested an introduction to our little gathering. I expect everyone's best behavior." The announcement sparked immediate speculation about the Dowager Duchess, her influence, her connections, her notoriously sharp tongue. Thea barely heard it. Her mind was already racing toward 10 o'clock, and what seeing Cassian again would feel like now that everything had changed. She arrived at the salon 5 minutes early and found Mrs. Pemberton already arranging papers. "Miss Brennan, good morning. You're keen today." "I prefer punctuality." "A dying virtue, I'm afraid. Mr. Davies will be late. He always is. His Highness, however." She glanced toward the door. "Ah, speak of the devil." Cassian entered precisely as the clock struck 10. Their eyes met, held for a fraction too long. His expression was carefully neutral, but Thea saw the tightness around his mouth, the way his hands flexed slightly before he clasped them behind his back. "Mrs. Pemberton, Miss Brennan." His voice was perfectly controlled. "Shall we begin without Davies? He can catch up when he arrives." "Excellent idea, Your Highness." They took their usual seats, Thea across from Cassian, Mrs. Pemberton to the side with her ledgers spread before her. The proximity was excruciating. Thea could see the place where his collar met his throat, could remember pressing her lips there last night when restraint had finally shattered completely, could remember the sound he'd made. "Miss Brennan?" She blinked. Mrs. Pemberton was looking at her expectantly. "I'm sorry?" "The greenhouse accounts. You reviewed them last week. Did the heating system installation come in under budget?" Thea forced herself to focus. "Yes, by nearly 15%. "Excellent." Mrs. Pemberton made a notation. His Highness's insistence on competitive bidding paid off. They worked through the agenda methodically. Thea contributed where appropriate, keeping her attention on numbers and logistics rather than the man across from her. It was nearly impossible. Every time he spoke, she heard the echo of his voice from last night. Rough, desperate, saying her name like a prayer. Every time their eyes met accidentally, she felt the ghost of his hands in her hair. Mr. Davies arrived 20 minutes late with profuse apologies. His presence should have eased the tension. Instead, it made everything worse, forcing Thea and Cassian into performative normalcy they were both terrible at. "The library shelving project," Mr. Davies announced, flipping through his notes. "I've obtained estimates for the music room installation Miss Brennan suggested. Significantly cheaper than the expansion, just as she predicted." "Excellent," Cassian said. His gaze flicked to Thea. "Well reasoned, Miss Brennan." "Thank you, Your Highness." The formality was absurd. They'd had their tongues in each other's mouths less than 12 hours ago. "We should implement it immediately," Mrs. Pemberton said, "before winter budgets consume all available funds." "Agreed." Cassian made a note. "Anything else requiring immediate attention?" They continued for another 40 minutes. By the time Mrs. Pemberton declared the meeting concluded, Thea's nerves were stretched taut. Mr. Davies and Mrs. Pemberton gathered their materials, still debating some point about fence repairs. Thea stood to leave. "Miss Brennan? A moment, please." She froze. Mr. Davies and Mrs. Pemberton were already heading toward the door, too engrossed in their debate to notice. The door closed behind them. Silence descended, heavy and charged. "We need to talk," Cassian said quietly. "Now?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, tonight. Same place, same time." "Is that wise?" "Probably not." He moved around the table, not close enough to touch, but near enough that she could see the strain in his expression. "But we can't leave things as they are. Last night was a mistake," she offered, though the words tasted bitter. "Was inevitable," he corrected, "but it complicates everything." "More complicated than before?" "Infinitely." He dragged a hand through his hair. "Thea, I need you to understand. What happened last night doesn't change the facts. I still failed your brother. I'm still responsible for—" "Stop." She cut him off sharply. "If you're about to tell me last night was wonderful but impossible, save it. I've heard that speech already." "That's not—" He stopped, reset. "I'm trying to be honest." "Then be honest about what you actually want instead of cataloguing all the reasons you can't have it." His jaw tightened. "What I want is irrelevant." "Is it?" She stepped closer, reckless now. "Because last night suggested otherwise." "Last night I wasn't thinking clearly." "Neither was I, and yet I don't regret it." Something flashed in his eyes. Heat, want, frustration, all tangled together. "You should," he said roughly. "You should regret it. Should demand I apologize, should—" Should what? Pretend it didn't happen? She was close enough now to see his pulse jumping at his throat. Pretend I don't still feel your hands on me? Pretend I don't want… He kissed her. Hard, desperate, entirely inappropriate for a salon where anyone could enter. Thea's back hit the wall. She hadn't realized he'd been moving them, and his body pressed against hers, pinning her there, while his mouth claimed hers with bruising intensity. This wasn't like last night's kisses. Those had been exploratory, almost tentative despite their passion. This was consumption. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head for better access. She gasped against his mouth and felt him shudder. His other hand found her waist, fingers pressing hard enough to leave marks through the fabric of her dress. She didn't care. Wanted marks. Wanted proof this was real. "We can't," he murmured against her lips, even as he kissed her again. "Anyone could." "I know." This is… Another kiss, deeper. Insanity. "I know." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. His pupils were blown wide, breathing ragged. "Tonight," he said, "we talk, properly, about what this means. And if we can't find answers, then at least we'll have asked the questions honestly." Footsteps in the corridor. They broke apart instantly, Thea smoothing her dress, Cassian putting the width of the room between them. The door opened. Lady Ashford entered, looking mildly surprised to find them still there. "Your Highness, Miss Brennan? I thought the meeting had concluded?" "It has," Cassian said, his voice betraying nothing. "I was just asking Miss Brennan's opinion on the music room shelving placement. She has an excellent eye for spatial arrangement." "How fortunate." Lady Ashford's gaze moved between them, assessing. "Miss Brennan, you should prepare for this afternoon's visit. The Dowager Duchess appreciates punctuality." "Of course, Lady Ashford." Thea left before her composure could crack. Her lips felt swollen. Her hair had come slightly loose. If anyone looked closely, they'd know exactly what she'd been doing. She made it to her room without encountering anyone, sat on her bed and pressed shaking hands to her face. This was spiraling beyond control, beyond reason. They were being reckless in ways that could destroy both of them, and she couldn't bring herself to care. The Dowager Duchess of Winters arrived at precisely 3 o'clock in a carriage that made Greymont's vehicles look modest. She was 70 if she was a day, tiny as a bird, with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "So," she announced without preamble once introductions were completed, "these are the unfortunate young ladies requiring the Crown's protection." Lady Ashford bristled. "They're wards, Your Grace, not unfortunates." Same thing, ultimately. The Duchess settled into the most comfortable chair with the air of someone claiming territory. "Well, don't just stand there gaping. Sit. Let me look at you properly." They sat. The Duchess surveyed them with the critical eye of someone evaluating livestock. "Too thin," she said, pointing at Miss Hartwell. "You, passable." This to one of the Dalton sisters. "You need better posture?" Lady Vivian, whose posture was already impeccable, somehow straightened further. The Duchess's gaze landed on Thea. "Brennan, isn't it? Kit Brennan's sister?" Thea's throat went dry. "Yes, Your Grace." Tragic business, that. Your brother had potential. Wasted, ultimately, but potential nonetheless. She paused. "You look like him. Same eyes. Steadier, though. He was always too impulsive." "Your Grace knew my brother." "Knew of him. One hears things." The Duchess's attention sharpened. One also hears His Highness has taken a particular interest in this establishment, visits more frequently than protocol requires. Curious that. The room went very quiet. Prince Cassian is conscientious about his responsibilities, Lady Ashford said carefully. The Duchess's gaze hadn't left Thea. Conscientious. One word for it, I suppose. Thea forced herself to meet those sharp eyes steadily. Whatever the Duchess suspected, showing weakness would only confirm it. His Highness has been very generous with his time, Thea said evenly. We're all grateful for his attention to our welfare. I'm sure you are. The Duchess smiled, a thin, knowing expression. Well, I've satisfied my curiosity. Lady Ashford, thank you for the introduction. Ladies, best of luck with your futures. You'll need it. She swept out as dramatically as she'd arrived, leaving uncomfortable silence in her wake. Well, Cordelia said finally. That was terrifying. The Duchess enjoys her reputation, Lady Ashford said, though she looked unsettled. I wouldn't worry about her observations. She makes pronouncements about everyone. But Thea noticed Lady Vivian watching her with new speculation, noticed the way Lady Ashford's gaze lingered thoughtfully. The Duchess had seen something, or suspected something. And now others would be watching more carefully. Thea excused herself as soon as propriety allowed and fled to her room. The poetry book was on her nightstand. Of course it was. This time there was no marked passage, just a note in that familiar handwriting. The Duchess sees too much. We need to be more careful. But I'm not sorry. Tonight, please. See. Thea pressed the note to her chest and tried to ignore the voice in her head, warning that being careful might already be impossible. That they'd crossed a line neither of them knew how to uncross. That this could only end in disaster. But when 9 o'clock came, she knew exactly where she'd be. Some disasters were worth the wreckage. Chapter 8. The East Garden felt different tonight. Colder, perhaps. Or maybe it was just that Thea's nerves had stripped away the romance of their first meeting, leaving only the sharp awareness of risk. She'd been more careful this time. Waited until the house was fully settled, checked the corridors twice before slipping out, wore a dark cloak that would blend with shadows if anyone happened to be looking out their window. Cassian was already at the fountain, pacing. He stopped when he heard her approach, relief and tension warring in his expression. You came. Did you think I wouldn't? After the Duchess. He shook his head. I thought you might reconsider the wisdom of this. I did reconsider it. Thea stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance that felt safer than proximity. I came anyway? That makes one of us wise, at least. I didn't claim wisdom, just choice. He almost smiled. Almost. We need rules. Rules. Boundaries. Parameters. He started pacing again. What happened this morning? In the salon. We can't do that again. Anyone could have walked in. If Lady Ashford had arrived 30 seconds earlier. But she didn't. This time. He stopped in front of her. Thea, I'm serious. The Duchess already suspects something. If others start noticing, if there's any hint of impropriety, your reputation would be destroyed. Your family's standing, already precarious, would collapse entirely. And yours? I'm the Crown Prince. Different rules apply. How convenient for you. His eyes flashed. That's not what I... He bit off the words. I'm trying to protect you. By establishing rules about when and where you're allowed to kiss me. By establishing rules about being smart instead of reckless. Smart would be not meeting like this at all. Yes, He agreed quietly. It would be. They stood in tense silence, the fountain's burble the only sound. So, what are these rules? Thea asked finally. No more stolen moments during the day. No lingering in doorways. No. He gestured vaguely. Whatever happened in the salon this morning. Understood. We act with perfect propriety in public. Nothing that could be misconstrued. And in private? His jaw tightened. There shouldn't be private. Not beyond these meetings. These meetings where we discuss how we shouldn't be meeting. Exactly. That seems productive. Thea. Her name was half warning, half plea. I'm trying to do the right thing here. The right thing would be letting me go, completely. No notes, no books, no midnight garden meetings. She stepped closer, despite her earlier resolution to maintain distance. But you're not doing that, are you? No. Why not? Because I'm weak, he said roughly. Because 3 years of restraint shattered the moment I touched you and I don't know how to rebuild it. Because... He stopped, turned away from her. Because what? She pressed. Because I've been half in love with you since you were 17 years old and too frightened to speak to me at Christmas dinner. The words came out harsh, angry, at himself, not her. Because watching you argue with Kit, watching you defend that novel with such passion, I thought here was someone who felt things deeply and wasn't afraid to show it. And I wanted that. Wanted to be on the receiving end of that kind of fierce certainty. Thea's breath caught. But you were 17, he continued, still not looking at her. And Kit's sister. And I was the crown prince with responsibilities and expectations, and no business noticing you at all. So I didn't. Or I told myself I didn't. And then Kit died, and I failed him. And suddenly, you were even more forbidden because I'd taken your brother from you. And what kind of man desires the sister of the friend he killed? You didn't kill him. I did, he said flatly. Through inaction, through cowardice, through choosing protocol over protection. And for 3 years I've lived with that. Told myself it was penance. Told myself the guilt was appropriate, earned, necessary. He finally turned to face her. And then you arrived here, and the guilt was still there, but so was everything else. Every reason I'd convinced myself to ignore. Except now you weren't 17. Now you were... What? Devastating, he whispered. Absolutely devastating. And I had no defenses left. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible and achingly honest. Thea's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to still them. 3 years, she said quietly. You've wanted me for 3 years and said nothing. What was I supposed to say? Sorry about your brother's death, which was my fault. But I've been attracted to you since you were barely an adult, and now I can't stop thinking about you. His laugh was bitter. That would have gone well. You could have tried honesty. Honesty would have been selfish. You were grieving. Your family was struggling. The last thing you needed was the man responsible for Kit's death confessing he had inappropriate feelings for you. So instead, you avoided me entirely, made me feel invisible, questioned whether I'd imagined any connection between us at all. Yes. No defensiveness now, just bleak acknowledgement. I hurt you, trying not to hurt you. I see that now. Thea moved closer, close enough to see the shadows under his eyes, the tension carved into every line of his face. I never blamed you for Kit's death, she said. You should. I blamed circumstance, politics, the corruption he was fighting. I blamed myself for not noticing how serious it had become, for not insisting he be more careful. She paused. I never blamed you because I didn't know you were involved. No one told me. You never told me. Would it have changed anything if I had? I don't know. Maybe. She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her palm found his cheek, felt the muscle jump beneath her touch. But I know this. Kit loved you, trusted you. Whatever happened, whatever choices were made, he wouldn't want you destroying yourself over it. You don't know that. I knew my brother. He would have hated this, hated watching you punish yourself, hated knowing I was caught in the aftermath of your guilt. Her thumb brushed his cheekbone. He would have told you to forgive yourself and move forward. I can't. Can't or won't. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his face. Both. Neither. I don't know any more. Then figure it out, she said quietly. Because I can't keep doing this, meeting in shadows, stealing moments, pretending we're not both falling apart from wanting something we tell ourselves we can't have. What's the alternative? Honesty. Real honesty. Not just confessions whispered in gardens where no one can hear. His eyes searched hers. You want me to court you, properly, publicly. I want you to stop treating this like it's shameful. It's not shameful. It's... He struggled for words. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. And if courting you publicly destroys your reputation, if people assume I've been taking advantage of my position, of your vulnerability, let them assume. Thea. Her name was anguished. You don't understand what you're asking. Don't I? She pulled her hand away, suddenly angry. You think I don't know what people will say? That I'm opportunistic? That I'm using my brother's death to secure a royal match? That I'm... None of that is true. It doesn't matter if it's true. It's what they'll believe. She wrapped her arms around herself. But I've already lost my brother. Already watched my family's reputation crumble. Already spent 3 years wondering if I was going mad, imagining your attention. I won't lose this too, because we're both too afraid of what people might think. Cassian stared at her, something like awe replacing the anguish. You're braver than I am, he said softly. I'm desperate. There's a difference. Is there? He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupped her face in both hands. God, you terrify me. The way you cut through every excuse I make, every defense I build, like none of it matters, like it's simple. It is simple. You want me. I want you. Everything else is just noise. That noise could destroy you. Only if I let it. She met his eyes steadily. Only if you let it. He kissed her then. Slowly this time, deliberately, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth. She felt the tremor in his hands, the restraint he was barely maintaining. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to want you and honor Kit's memory. How to protect you and claim you publicly. How to... We'll figure it out, she interrupted. Together, if you're willing to try. If I'm willing... He laughed, the sound breaking. Thea, I've been willing since you walked into Greymont and looked at me like I was a puzzle you intended to solve. I've just been too afraid to admit it. And now? Now I'm still afraid. He pulled back enough to see her properly. But I'm more afraid of losing you. Then stop trying to push me away. All right. The words came quietly, decisively. All right. No more pushing away. No more hiding. We do this, whatever this is, properly. Properly how? I court you, openly. Let people speculate. Let them talk. His jaw set. Let them see that I choose you, and to hell with anyone who questions it. Hope flared in Thea's chest, bright and terrifying. You mean that? I'm choosing to mean it. There's a difference. He managed a smile, wry and self-aware. Ask me again in daylight when I'm thinking clearly. I might panic. I'll remind you of this conversation. Please do. They stood wrapped in each other, the garden quiet around them. Thea listened to his heartbeat, felt the rise and fall of his breathing, and tried to believe this was real, that he would actually follow through, that they might have a chance. I should go, she said finally, though she made no move to pull away. You should. Before someone notices I'm missing. Yes. Neither of them moved. Cassian? His name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Right. Tomorrow, at breakfast. Will you acknowledge you properly? Yes. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Sit beside you at dinner? Yes. Ask you to walk with me in full view of Lady Ashford and whoever else wants to watch? Absolutely yes. They'll know. Let them. She pulled back to study his face, found determination there, and fear, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Don't change your mind, she whispered. I won't. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her again, soft and lingering. Now go, before I decide keeping you here is worth whatever scandal follows. Thea left reluctantly, glancing back twice to find him watching her from beside the fountain. When she reached her room, her hands were still trembling. But this time it wasn't from fear or confusion. It was anticipation. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just hoped they were both ready for it. The poetry book appeared on her nightstand that night, but this time there was no marked passage. Just a note. Tomorrow I will be braver than I've been in 3 years. Don't let me fail. Yours, C. Thea pressed the note to her heart and finally let herself believe. Chapter 9. Thea woke before dawn, her stomach a knot of anticipation and dread. Today, everything changed. Or it didn't, and she'd know exactly how much Cassian's nighttime courage could withstand daylight scrutiny. She chose her dress carefully, the green one that made her eyes look more grey than brown, that fit well without being ostentatious. Her maid noticed her unusual attention to details, but said nothing, though her knowing smile suggested she'd drawn her own conclusions. By the time Thea descended to breakfast, her hands were clammy, despite the morning chill. The breakfast room was already half full. Lady Vivian at one end with her coffee and aristocratic posture. The Dalton sisters debating something in hushed tones. Miss Hartwell reading a letter, her expression troubled. No Cassian. Thea's heart sank. Of course. Morning courage dissolved in the face of actual consequence. She'd been a fool to believe. The door opened. Cassian entered, still in riding clothes, hair slightly windswept. His gaze swept the room and landed on her with unmistakable intent. He crossed directly to where she stood by the sideboard. Miss Brennan, good morning. Every conversation in the room faltered. Your Highness? She managed a curtsy despite her trembling knees. I hope you slept well? It was an ordinary question, the kind asked a dozen times every morning in polite society, except he was standing closer than propriety strictly required. and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made the question feel infinitely more intimate. "Well enough. Thank you." "Excellent." He reached past her for the teapot, unnecessary, as a servant stood ready to pour, and his sleeve brushed her arm. "I wondered if you might join me for a ride this morning. The weather is fine, and I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the estate." The room had gone completely silent. Thea's pulse hammered. This was it. The public declaration he'd promised. "I would enjoy that very much, Your Highness." "Wonderful. Shall we say 10 o'clock? That gives you time to change into riding clothes." 10 o'clock, she agreed. He smiled. Small, private, meant only for her, despite their audience. Then he collected his tea and moved to sit at the head of the table. Thea took her own seat, acutely aware of every eye in the room tracking her movements. Lady Ashford entered moments later, took in the scene with one comprehensive glance, and settled into her chair with an expression that revealed nothing. Breakfast proceeded with excruciating normalcy. Toast was passed. Jam was distributed. The Dalton sisters resumed their debate, though with less conviction than before. But Thea felt the weight of speculation pressing down on all of them. When Cassian rose to leave, estate business, he explained to Lady Ashford, he paused by Thea's chair. 10 o'clock, he reminded her quietly. Don't keep me waiting. The words were perfectly proper. The way he looked at her when he said them was not. The moment the door closed behind him, Lady Vivian set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Well," she said, "that was illuminating." Thea forced herself to meet her gaze steadily. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Aren't you?" Lady Vivian's smile was sharp. "His Highness has been at Greymont for weeks and hasn't invited anyone riding. Now suddenly he's seeking your company specifically. One wonders what changed." "Perhaps he simply wishes to be hospitable," Thea said evenly. "Perhaps." Lady Vivian didn't sound convinced. Or perhaps the Dowager Duchess was correct in her observations yesterday. His Highness has taken a particular interest in this household. In you, specifically. "Lady Vivian," Lady Ashford said warningly. "I'm merely making an observation, Lady Ashford. Surely we're all adults here. We can acknowledge what's plainly obvious." "Nothing is obvious," Thea said, though her cheeks burned. "His Highness knew my brother. He's being kind." "Is that what we're calling it?" Lady Vivian stood, smoothing her skirts. "Well, I hope his kindness doesn't cause you difficulties, Miss Brennan. The ton can be unforgiving toward those perceived as reaching above their station." She left before Thea could formulate a response. Silence hung heavy. Then Cordelia cleared her throat. "For what it's worth, I think she's jealous." "Cordelia," Miss Hartwell murmured. "What?" "It's true. Lady Vivian has been angling for His Highness's attention since we arrived. Now he's noticed someone else, and she's bitter about it." Cordelia turned to Thea. "Don't let her make you feel small. You've done nothing wrong." "Haven't I?" Thea's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Have you?" Cordelia challenged. "Did you throw yourself at the prince? Manipulate him somehow? Or did he simply notice you and choose to act on it?" "It's more complicated than that." "Everything is more complicated than it appears. Doesn't make it wrong." Lady Ashford stood, effectively ending the conversation. "Ladies, I believe we all have activities to attend to. Miss Brennan, you should prepare for your ride. His Highness values punctuality. It was a dismissal." Thea took it gratefully, fleeing to her room before anyone could corner her with more questions. At precisely 10 o'clock, Thea descended to the stables in borrowed riding clothes that fit better than her own had. Cassian was already there, checking his horse's girth with the practiced ease of someone who didn't entirely trust grooms to do it properly. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression softened. "You came." "You asked." "I did." He gestured to a mare being led forward by a groom. "This is Juniper. Gentle as they come, but more spirit than Clover. I thought you might enjoy the challenge." Thea approached the mare slowly, letting her sniff her hand before stroking her neck. "She's beautiful." "She is, and she likes you already." The groom helped Thea mount. Cassian swung into his own saddle with fluid grace, and they set off at an easy walk. Away from the house, away from watching eyes. Neither spoke until they'd cleared the immediate grounds and entered open countryside. "That was brave," Thea said finally. "This morning?" "That was terrifying," he corrected. "I nearly turned back 3 times before entering the breakfast room." "But you didn't." "No, I made a promise." He glanced at her. "Though I may have underestimated how many people would notice." "Lady Vivian certainly noticed." His jaw tightened. "I heard what she said. After I left." "How?" "Lady Ashford told me. She thought I should be aware of the speculation." He paused. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you a target." "I knew I would be, the moment you showed interest publicly." "Does it bother you?" Thea considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not enough to want you to take it back." Something in his posture relaxed. "Good, because I don't think I could." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, following a path that wound through woods still bare, but showing promise of spring. Birds called overhead. The horses moved easily beneath them. It felt almost normal, like they were simply 2 people enjoying a morning ride, uncomplicated by politics or grief or impossible circumstances. "There's something I need to tell you," Cassian said, as they emerged from the trees into open meadow. Thea's stomach clenched. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous. Just necessary." He reined his horse to a stop. Thea halted beside him. "The corruption Kit was investigating. The families involved. One of them is Lord Marchmont." "I know. Everyone knows. His scandal destroyed half the nobility." "What everyone doesn't know is that the evidence used to expose him came from Kit's investigation. The papers Kit died protecting, I kept them, used them, waited until the timing was right and the case was airtight, then released everything." Thea stared at him. "You brought down Marchmont." "Kit brought down Marchmont. I just finished what he started." Cassian's hands tightened on his reins. "It took me 2 years to gather enough corroborating evidence that the Crown couldn't be accused of acting on vendetta. But when the charges were finally filed, it was Kit's work that formed the foundation. Does anyone know that? A handful of people. The king, his closest advisors, Marchmont himself, though he'd never admit it publicly." Cassian paused. "And now you." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if we're doing this, courting publicly, being honest, you deserve to know what you're aligning yourself with. I didn't just fail to protect Kit. I used his death, made it meaningful politically. Some people would call that honoring his sacrifice. Others would call it exploitation. What do you call it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Both. Neither. Necessary." He finally looked at her. "I don't know if what I did was right. I just know it was what Kit would have wanted. Evidence used, corruption exposed, justice, even if it came too late to save him." Thea's throat felt tight. "He would have been proud of you." "Would he?" Cassian's voice cracked slightly. Or would he have been furious that I waited, that I let him die before acting? He would have understood. Kit was never impulsive about the things that mattered. He would have seen the wisdom in building an airtight case. You're generous. I'm honest. She guided Juniper closer until the horses stood nearly touching. Cassian, you've been carrying this guilt for 3 years, punishing yourself for choices Kit wouldn't have blamed you for. When does it end? I don't know. Yes, you do. It ends when you decide to forgive yourself. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. She reached across the space between them, caught his hand. Let me help you learn. His fingers closed around hers, grip almost painful in its intensity. They sat like that, hands clasped, horses patient beneath them, while the wind moved through the grass and the world continued around them. There's one more thing, Cassian said finally. Of course there is. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Lord Hartley, I asked him to court you. Thea blinked. You what? Months ago, before you arrived, I knew Kit's sister would be coming to Greymont. Knew you'd need protection, prospects. Hartley is a good man, kind, honourable. He stopped. Everything I thought you deserved instead of me. You orchestrated my courtship with someone else. I tried to. Yes. While wanting me yourself. While believing I had no right to want you myself. He corrected. There's a difference. Thea didn't know whether to laugh or be furious. That's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. In retrospect, yes. Owen knew. That's why he said... She cut herself off. He said he wouldn't be someone's safe choice when the choice they actually wanted was unavailable. He's perceptive. I should have known he'd see through me. Cassian's thumb stroked across her knuckles. I'm sorry. For trying to manage your future without asking what you wanted. For being a coward. You've apologized for that already. I'll probably apologize several more times before I feel I've done it adequately. Or you could just stop being a coward going forward. I'm trying. He raised her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. This, right now, is me trying. The gesture was so simple, so devastatingly intimate despite its propriety. Thea's breath caught. We should head back, Cassian said reluctantly, before Lady Ashford sends a search party. Probably wise. Neither of them moved. Finally, with obvious effort, Cassian released her hand and turned his horse back toward Greymont. They rode in silence, but it was different now, less fraught, more settled, like something had been acknowledged and accepted between them. When they reached the stables, a groom was waiting with an anxious expression. Your Highness, Lady Ashford requests your immediate presence. He glanced at Thea uncertainly. There's been a complication. Cassian was off his horse in seconds. What kind of complication? A visitor, Your Highness. Lord Marchmont's son. He's demanding to speak with you. The blood drained from Cassian's face. Thea dismounted quickly, legs unsteady. Why is he here? I don't know. Cassian was already moving toward the house. Stay here. This doesn't concern you. If it's about Kit's investigation. Thea, please. He stopped, turned. Let me handle this. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand inclusion in anything involving her brother, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. All right, she said quietly. But you tell me everything afterward. I will. I promise." He left at a near run. Thea stood in the stable yard, her earlier contentment evaporating like mist. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good, and she had a terrible feeling it was about to destroy the fragile peace they'd just begun to build. Chapter 10. Thea couldn't stay away. She told herself she'd wait in the stables, give Cassian privacy to handle whatever crisis Marchmont's son had brought. Be patient and trust him to explain afterward. She lasted 10 minutes. Then she was moving toward the house, propriety be damned. If this involved Kit's investigation, Kit's death, she had every right to know. The front entrance was too exposed. She slipped through the servant's door, nodding at a startled kitchen maid, and made her way toward the main rooms. Voices echoed from the formal salon, raised, angry. She recognized Cassian's controlled tone, and another voice, younger, sharp with fury. "How dare you stand there and lecture me about honor when you let my father rot in prison for crimes your friend committed?" Thea froze outside the door. "Your father committed those crimes," Cassian said, each word precise as a blade. "The evidence was irrefutable. Evidence provided by Kit Brennan, who conveniently died before he could be questioned about how he obtained it." The younger Marchmont's voice cracked. "Stolen documents, forged signatures. My father maintains his innocence, and the one person who could prove otherwise is dead." The documents weren't forged. They were authenticated by 3 independent sources. "Sources you selected. Sources loyal to the Crown." A bitter laugh. "How convenient. How tidy. Brennan dies a hero, my father is destroyed, and you walk away unstained." Silence. Thea pressed closer to the door. "What exactly are you accusing me of, Marchmont?" Cassian's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I'm not sure yet, but I know Brennan's death was too convenient. I know you benefited from it, used his investigation to eliminate your political enemies without getting your own hands dirty." Papers rustled. "And I know his sister is currently residing under your protection at Greymont. One wonders what kind of protection you're offering." Thea's blood went cold. "Watch yourself." Cassian's tone could have cut glass. "Or what? You'll silence me the way you silenced Brennan." A crash. Furniture overturning. Footsteps. When Cassian spoke again, his voice shook with barely restrained violence. "I did not silence Kit Brennan. He was my closest friend. I would have given anything, my position, my life, to save him." Pretty words. But words don't explain why he died investigating your enemies, why his evidence surfaced only after his death, why his family was conveniently recalled to your estate where you could monitor them. Marchmont's voice dripped poison. "Tell me, Your Highness, does Miss Brennan know you're using her? Or is she too blinded by your attention to see it?" Thea didn't think. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Both men whirled. Cassian looked stricken. The younger Marchmont, she recognized him now, James Marchmont, barely 25, looked triumphant. "Miss Brennan?" James said smoothly. "How fortuitous. Perhaps you can settle this debate. Did His Highness explain why your brother really died? Or has he been too busy courting you to mention the details?" "Get out," Cassian said flatly. "I think the lady deserves to hear this." "Thea," Cassian's eyes pleaded. "Please, go." She ignored him, moving fully into the room. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. "I know why my brother died, Lord Marchmont. He died exposing corruption. Your family's corruption." James's smile was ugly. "Is that what he told you?" "That's what the evidence showed." Evidence my father claims was fabricated. Evidence that appeared only after the one man who could verify its authenticity was dead. James turned to Cassian. Awfully convenient, wouldn't you say? The evidence was verified, Cassian started. By your people, your sources, your investigation. James cut him off. Forgive me if I find that less than compelling. Your father's ledgers showed embezzlement of Crown funds, Thea said, her voice harder now. Bribes paid to foreign agents, communications with known traitors. Are you claiming all of that was fabricated? I'm claiming it was obtained illegally, through methods that would never hold up to scrutiny if the investigator were alive to be questioned. James's gaze moved between them. But he's not alive, is he? How convenient for His Highness. How very, very convenient. That's enough, Cassian said. Is it? I don't think so. James pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have a letter here, written by my father from prison. He claims Kit Brennan approached him months before his death, offered to falsify evidence in exchange for money. My father refused. Shortly after, Brennan died, and the evidence appeared. That's a lie, Thea said immediately. Is it? Were you there? I knew my brother. He would never... Wouldn't he? He needed money. Your family was struggling financially even before the scandal. Perhaps he saw an opportunity. James's smile turned vicious. Or perhaps His Highness here saw an opportunity. Remove a political enemy, secure evidence against others, and cement his own power. All it required was one convenient death. You're implying I killed Kit, Cassian said, voice like ice. I'm implying someone did, and the person who benefited most was you. The room seemed to tilt. Thea grabbed the back of a chair for support. This is madness, she managed. Is it? James moved closer to her. Think, Miss Brennan. Really think. Your brother dies under mysterious circumstances. The evidence he supposedly gathered surfaces only after his death. And now the Crown Prince who used that evidence to destroy his enemies is courting you. Doesn't that strike you as calculated? It strikes me as grief being weaponized by a desperate man trying to save his guilty father, Thea said, though her voice shook. Or perhaps you're being used. Perhaps His Highness's attention is designed to keep you quiet, to ensure Kit Brennan's sister doesn't ask inconvenient questions about how her brother really died. That's enough. Cassian's control finally shattered. You will leave. Now, before I have you forcibly removed. Gladly. But I'll be back, with lawyers, with questions. James bowed mockingly. Enjoy your courtship, Your Highness. I wonder how long it will last once people start asking why you're so determined to keep the dead investigator's sister close. He swept out, leaving poisonous silence in his wake. Thea stood frozen, her mind racing through everything she'd just heard. Kit approaching Marchmont for money, evidence appearing only after his death. Cassian benefiting politically from the scandal. None of it made sense. All of it made terrible sense. Thea? Cassian's voice was gentle, careful. Look at me. She did, saw anguish in his eyes, and something else, fear. Tell me he's lying, she whispered. He is, about most of it. Most of it! Cassian dragged a hand through his hair. The evidence did surface after Kit's death. That part is true. Kit had hidden it. He knew it was dangerous, knew people would kill to keep it secret. He told me where to find it only hours before he died. But you said he died from infection, from an injury. He did, but the injury... Cassian's voice broke. It wasn't random. He was attacked By someone who wanted the evidence he'd gathered. The room spun. Thea sat abruptly. You never told me that. I couldn't. The investigation was ongoing. Revealing that Kit was murdered would have alerted the people involved, given them time to destroy evidence, flee the country. He moved closer but didn't touch her. I'm sorry. I should have told you. But I was trying to protect the investigation, to make sure Kit's death meant something. He was murdered. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Yes. And you knew. For 3 years you knew, and you said nothing. I was ordered not to, by the king himself. The conspiracy went deeper than just Marchmont. There were others involved. Revealing Kit's murder would have compromised everything. Thea's hands fisted in her skirts. Did my family know? My father? No. We told them the infection story. It was kinder than the truth. Kinder. She laughed, the sound brittle. You lied to my grieving father because it was kinder. Thea, please. And now, is courting me also kindness? Or is Marchmont right? Are you keeping me close to ensure I don't ask questions? Cassian looked like she'd struck him. You can't believe that. I don't know what to believe anymore. She stood, needing distance. You've been lying to me for 3 years, about Kit's death, about your involvement, about everything. Not about my feelings, never about that. How would I know? How can I trust anything you've said when the foundation of it all is built on lies? They weren't lies, they were necessary omissions. That's the same thing. It's not. He stopped. Reset. You're right. It's the same thing. I should have told you the truth about Kit's death. I should have found a way to be honest, despite the king's orders. His voice cracked. I failed you. Again. Thea pressed her hands to her face. Her head was pounding, thoughts scattered. Kit was murdered. Cassian knew. The evidence that destroyed Marchmont came from her dead brother, and now Marchmont's son was claiming it was all fabricated. I need time, she said quietly. Of course. Take all the time you need. I need to think. To process all of this without you here confusing everything. Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. I understand. Do you? She looked at him, really looked, saw the man she'd kissed in the garden, the man who'd promised honesty, the man who'd been lying by omission for 3 years. Because I don't understand any of this anymore. What can I do? Nothing. There's nothing you can do right now except leave me alone. He flinched, but he moved toward the door, paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, he said quietly, everything I've felt for you is real. The rest, the investigation, the lies, the failures, all of that is tangled and complicated and messy. But my feelings for you have always been clear, have always been the one thing I couldn't question, no matter how hard I tried. That doesn't make this hurt less. I know. He looked back at her, expression devastated. I'm sorry. For all of it. For every choice that brought us here. Then he was gone. Thea sank back into the chair and let herself break. She didn't go down to dinner. Cordelia came to check on her, took one look at her face, and left without asking questions. Though she returned an hour later with tea and biscuits Thea couldn't eat. Whatever happened, it's not the end of the world, Cordelia said gently. Isn't it? No, it's just complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. She paused. Do you want to talk about it? I can't. That's all right, but I'm here when you can. After Cordelia left, Thea sat by the window and watched darkness fall. Her mind turned over everything Marchmont had said, everything Cassian had admitted. Kit was murdered. The evidence was real but hidden. Cassian had used it to destroy his enemies, and now he was courting her. Was it calculation? Insurance against awkward questions? Or was it what he claimed? Genuine feeling he'd been suppressing for 3 years. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But trust, once broken, didn't rebuild easily. Near midnight, there was a soft knock at her door. She opened it to find a servant holding the poetry book. "From His Highness, miss. He said you'd want this." Thea took it with trembling hands. Inside, a new note. "I have lied to you about many things, but never about wanting you, never about loving you. Whatever you decide about us, about me, that will remain true. I'm sorry isn't enough, but I'm sorry anyway. Yours, even if you can't be mine, C." Thea read it 3 times. Then she pressed the book to her chest and cried until she had no tears left. Tomorrow she would have to decide, believe him or walk away. Tonight, she just let herself hurt. Chapter 11. Thea didn't sleep. She spent the night sitting by the window, watching the gardens turn from black to grey to gold as dawn crept across the grounds. The poetry book lay open in her lap, Cassian's note pressed between its pages. Never about loving you. He'd written the word she'd been afraid to think. Love, not attraction or want or complicated desire. Love. And she didn't know if she could believe him. By the time her maid knocked with morning tea, Thea had made a decision. Not about Cassian. That felt too large, too tangled to unravel in one sleepless night. But about what she needed. Answers. Real ones. No more omissions disguised as protection. She dressed carefully in the grey morning dress that made her look older, more severe. Armour against whatever was coming. At breakfast, she learned Cassian had left at dawn for the capital. Urgent business with the king, Lady Ashford explained, though her gaze lingered on Thea with new speculation. The Marchmont accusation had spread. Thea could feel it in the way conversations faltered when she entered rooms, in the sidelong glances from the other women. Lady Vivian was the only one bold enough to address it directly. "Lord Marchmont's son made quite serious allegations yesterday," she said over tea. "One can't help but wonder about the timing, just as His Highness begins showing you particular attention." "One can wonder many things," Thea said evenly, "not all of them rooted in truth. Of course, though smoke often indicates fire. And sometimes smoke is just someone trying to obscure the truth with noise." Lady Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You defend him." "I defend facts over speculation." "How loyal." The word dripped with something darker than admiration. "I hope such loyalty is rewarded rather than exploited." Thea set down her cup with deliberate care. "What exactly are you implying, Lady Vivian?" "Nothing that hasn't been implied already. You're Kit Brennan's sister. The Crown Prince courted your brother's friendship, used his investigation, and now courts you. Some might see a pattern." "And what pattern do you see?" "Control." Lady Vivian leaned forward. "His Highness is many things, but careless isn't one of them. Every relationship is strategic. Every alliance calculated. If he's pursuing you, there's a reason beyond simple affection." "Perhaps the reason is that he cares for me." "Perhaps. Or perhaps your insurance, the dead investigator's sister, kept close and compliant through romantic attention." Lady Vivian's smile was knife-sharp. I'm merely suggesting you consider all possibilities before surrendering your heart entirely. Cordelia had been listening from nearby. Now she rose, crossed to their table. Lady Vivian, perhaps you should consider keeping your speculation to yourself, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing rather than jealous conjecture. I'm not jealous. Aren't you? Cordelia's tone was pleasant but firm. You've been angling for His Highness's notice since we arrived. Now he's noticed someone else, and suddenly you're concerned about strategic manipulation. Forgive me if I find that transparently petty. Lady Vivian stood abruptly. I was merely trying to help. No, you were trying to plant doubt. There's a difference. Cordelia turned to Thea. Come on, let's walk in the garden. The air in here has gone sour. Thea followed gratefully, leaving Lady Vivian simmering behind them. Outside, the morning was cold but clear. They walked in silence until they were well away from the house. Thank you, Thea said finally. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to be insufferably nosy. Cordelia linked their arms. What actually happened yesterday? With Marchmont's son? Thea hesitated, but Cordelia had defended her publicly. She deserved honesty. He accused Cassian of using my brother's investigation for political gain, implied Kit's death was too convenient, suggested I'm being manipulated. And some of it was true. Kit was murdered. I didn't know that. Cassian kept it secret to protect the larger investigation. The evidence Kit gathered did destroy Cassian's enemies. She swallowed hard. I don't know what to believe anymore. Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. Do you think he's using you? I don't want to think that. That's not what I asked. Thea stopped walking, turned to face her friend. No, deep down, I don't think he's using me, but I'm also not sure I can trust my own judgment where he's concerned. I want to believe him too much to be objective. Then don't be objective. Be honest. Cordelia squeezed her arm. What does your heart tell you? That he's telling the truth about his feelings, that he's been carrying impossible guilt and making terrible choices trying to honor Kit's memory, that he's... Her voice cracked. That he loves me. Actually loves me. And your head? Says I'm a fool for believing any of it. Well, hearts and heads rarely agree. That's what makes being human so wretchedly complicated. Cordelia started walking again. For what it's worth, I've watched him watch you, when he thinks no one's looking. And I don't think that's calculation. I think that's a man who's completely undone. Or a very good actor. Possibly, but I don't think so. They'd reached the fountain, the same fountain where everything had changed. You have to decide what you're willing to risk, Thea. Belief or safety. You can't have both. I want both. We all do. We never get it. Cassian returned that evening. Thea heard the commotion from her room. Horses, servants, the particular energy that accompanied his arrivals. She moved to her window and saw him dismount, saw the weariness in every line of his body. He looked up, as if sensing her observation. Their eyes met across the distance. Then he was inside, lost from view. 10 minutes later, a knock at her door. Not a servant this time. Him. Thea opened it to find Cassian standing in the corridor, still in travelling clothes, looking like he'd ridden straight from the capital without stopping. May I come in? His voice was hoarse. She should say no, should maintain propriety, demand they speak in public spaces with chaperones present. Instead, she stepped back, letting him enter. He stopped just inside the threshold, as if afraid to come further uninvited. I went to see your father, he said without preamble. Thea's breath caught. What? I rode to your aunt's house, asked to speak with him, told him everything about Kit's murder, about the investigation, about the evidence and the lies and the king's orders. His hands were shaking. I told him the truth I should have told him 3 years ago. Why? The word came out barely audible. Because you deserve honesty, and because keeping that secret, protecting him from pain by hiding the truth, was exactly the kind of choice that got us here. I won't make it again. Thea moved to sit on the edge of her bed. Her legs wouldn't hold her. What did he say? Cassian's expression was devastated. He thanked me. Can you imagine? I told him I let his son die, that I'd been lying for 3 years, and he thanked me for finally trusting him with the truth. That sounds like my father. He also said, Cassian's voice broke. He said Kit wrote him a letter, before he died, left it with his solicitor with instructions to deliver it if anything happened to him. Thea went very still. What did it say? Your father showed me. Kit wrote that he knew the investigation was dangerous, that if he died, it would likely be because he'd gotten too close to the truth. And he wrote... Cassian pulled a folded paper from his coat with trembling hands. He wrote that I wasn't to blame, that he'd made his own choices knowing the risks, that he hoped I'd use the evidence to finish what he started. He held out the paper. Thea took it, unfolded it with numb fingers. Her brother's handwriting? Familiar, achingly familiar. Cassian, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't blame yourself, I know you will, but don't. I chose this investigation knowing what it might cost. You counseled caution, and I ignored it. That's on me, not you. Use the evidence. Destroy them. Make my death count for something. And for God's sake, stop being so bloody noble about everything. You'll make yourself miserable. Take care of my family, especially Thea. She's stronger than she thinks, but she'll need someone who sees that strength and doesn't try to protect her from it. Live your life. Love someone. Be happy. That's not betraying my memory. It's honoring it. Your friend always, Kit. Thea read it twice, 3 times. Tears blurring the words. He knew, she whispered. He knew the risks. He knew I'd blame myself. He knew... Cassian's voice was raw. He gave me permission to move forward, and I've been ignoring it for 3 years because guilt felt safer than forgiveness. He told you to take care of me. He did. Is that why you're here? Obligation? No. Cassian moved closer, dropped to his knees in front of her. God, no. I've been trying to honor Kit's memory by staying away from you. Convinced myself that wanting you was dishonoring him. But he gestured to the letter. He told me to live, to love, and I've been too afraid to listen. Thea touched his face, felt wetness there. He was crying. I love you, he said, the words breaking. I've loved you since you were 17, and argued about novels with such passion I couldn't look away. I loved you through Kit's death and my guilt, and 3 years of telling myself I had no right. I loved you when you arrived at Greymont, and every moment since. And I will love you whether you choose me or not, whether you forgive me or not, whether... She kissed him, cut off his desperate words with her mouth, her hands in his hair, her body leaning into his. He made a sound, half sob, half relief, and kissed her back with devastating tenderness. This wasn't hunger, wasn't passion or desire, or any of the things that had driven their previous kisses. This was surrender, mutual and complete. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. I love you too, Thea whispered. I'm terrified and confused. and I don't know how we make this work, but I love you." "We'll figure it out," he said fiercely. "Together. No more secrets, no more lies, no more running. Never again." He pulled her close, forehead resting against hers. "I'm done running. From you, from this, from everything I've wanted and been too afraid to claim." They held each other as the last of the daylight faded outside. Eventually, Cassian pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "There's one more thing. The king is launching a formal inquiry into Marchmont's allegations. It means everything will come out. Kit's investigation, his murder, all of it. Your family will be questioned. So will you. I'm not afraid of questions. The answers might be painful. The truth usually is." She took his hand, laced their fingers together. "But I'd rather have painful truth than comfortable lies. Even if the truth is that I made terrible choices, that I failed Kit in ways I can't undo. Even then, because you're also the man who spent 3 years trying to make his death mean something, who used the evidence to bring down corruption, who loved him enough to honor his work even when it destroyed you to do it." Cassian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You don't get to decide that. I do." She squeezed his hand. "And I choose to forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger will only destroy us both." "Thea, I'm not saying this doesn't hurt. It does. The lies, the secrets, all of it. But I also see why you made those choices. And I choose to believe, that you made them for the right reasons, even when they were wrong." He kissed her then, soft and reverent and full of promise. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips. She pulled back, eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, when the inquiry is over and the truth is out and we've rebuilt trust properly. Marry me." "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. I'll do better. I'll plan something elaborate with flowers and poetry and—" "Yes." He stopped. "Yes. Yes. I'll marry you. Eventually. When we're ready." She smiled through her tears. "But you should probably court me properly first. Take me to dinners. Write me letters. Do all the things people do when they're falling in love, instead of just being thrown into it by circumstance." "I can do that." His smile was tremulous, hopeful. "I can absolutely do that." "Good." She kissed him again. "Now get out of my room before someone finds us and we create an entirely different scandal." He laughed, actual laughter, light and genuine, and stood reluctantly. At the door, he paused. "Tomorrow. Breakfast. I'm sitting beside you and I don't care who notices. I'll save you a seat. And the day after that, we're riding. Just us. Properly chaperoned if we must, but together." "I'd like that." "And every day after until you're sick of my company." "That might take a while." "Good." He smiled at her, real and unguarded. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the faith you're showing me." After he left, Thea sat with Kit's letter and cried, not from grief this time, from relief. Her brother had given them permission, had seen what she was only just beginning to understand, that love wasn't betrayal, that moving forward wasn't forgetting, that honoring the dead sometimes meant choosing to live. Outside her window, the moon rose over the gardens where everything had changed. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the inquiry, the questions, the public scrutiny of their relationship. But tonight, she had truth. and love, and the beginning of something that felt like hope. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Chapter 12. The inquiry began 3 days later. Investigators arrived from London, serious men with ledgers and questions, taking over one wing of Greymont and interviewing everyone who'd known Kit Brennan or had any connection to the Marchmont investigation. Thea was questioned twice, once about her brother's activities in the months before his death, again about her relationship with Prince Cassian and whether she'd been pressured or influenced in any way. She answered honestly. Kit had been secretive, but not alarmed, busy, but not frightened. She'd known nothing about corruption or investigations until after his death. As for Cassian, she looked the investigator directly in the eye and said she was courting him of her own free will. No pressure, no coercion. Just two people choosing each other despite complicated circumstances. The investigator had looked skeptical, but written it down. The whole household was on edge. The other women whispered in corners. Lady Ashford maintained rigid composure while clearly fraying at the edges. Even the servants moved more quietly, as if noise might draw unwanted attention. Cassian was questioned for hours. Thea didn't see him during the day. He was sequestered with investigators, providing documentation, testimony, evidence. But he came to her every evening, after dark, when the household had settled. They didn't meet in the garden anymore. Too exposed. Instead, he came to her room, shockingly improper. But neither of them cared. They talked. About Kit, about the investigation, about the life they were trying to build from the wreckage of secrets and grief. And they touched. Carefully at first, then with growing confidence. His hand in her hair, her head on his shoulder. Kisses that started gentle and deepened until they had to pull apart, breathless and wanting. "We should wait," he'd murmur, even as his hands betrayed him by pulling her closer. "We should," she'd agree, kissing him again. But they always stopped, always maintained the line between wanting and having. Not from propriety, that ship had sailed, but from something more fundamental, the need to build this properly, to prove to themselves and everyone else that this was real, not just passion born from crisis. On the fourth day, Owen Hartley visited. Thea was in the library when he arrived, trying to distract herself with a book she couldn't focus on. He found her there, looking apologetic and determined in equal measure. "Miss Brennan? Thea? May I speak with you?" She set down her book. "Of course." He settled into the chair across from her, fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. "I heard about the inquiry, about Marchmont's accusations." He paused. "I wanted to see if you were all right." "That's kind of you." "It's selfish, actually. I've been worried." He met her eyes. "And I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner. For pursuing you when it was obvious, should have been obvious, that your heart was already engaged elsewhere." He smiled ruefully. "I told myself I was being optimistic. Really, I was being willfully blind." "Owen." "No. Let me finish. Please." He leaned forward. "You deserve someone who sees you clearly, who loves you without reservation. I thought I could be that person. But the truth is, I liked the idea of you more than I knew the reality of you. Cassian knows you, loves the actual you, not some idealized version." Thea's throat tightened. "You're being remarkably gracious about this." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." He stood, moved to look out the window. "I also came to tell you something. About the inquiry." Her stomach clenched. "What about it?" "I was questioned yesterday. about my observations of His Highness's behavior toward you, whether I noticed anything inappropriate or coercive. He glanced back at her. I told them the truth, that he's been obviously in love with you since you arrived, that every action, every choice he made regarding you was about protection and care, not manipulation. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because it's true, and because... He turned fully to face her. Because watching someone I care about be smeared by political machinations makes me furious. Marchmont's son isn't seeking justice. He's seeking revenge, and I won't be party to that. Thea crossed to him, took his hands in hers. Thank you, truly. Don't thank me yet. My testimony helps, but the inquiry is far from over. Marchmont has powerful allies. They're pushing hard to prove the evidence against his father was fabricated or obtained illegally. Was it? The illegal part? Possibly. Kit wasn't exactly obtaining warrants before investigating. Owen squeezed her hands gently. But fabricated? No. I've seen some of the documentation. Your brother was thorough. The corruption was real. Then why is this still happening? Because truth and politics rarely align neatly, Marchmont's allies want him freed. They'll use any excuse. Procedural irregularities, questions about evidence chain of custody, accusations of conspiracy. He paused. They're also using you. Me? The narrative they're building. Crown Prince manipulates dead investigator's sister to legitimize questionable evidence, keeps her close to control the story, courts her to ensure her silence and cooperation. Owen's expression was grim. It's despicable, and it's working on some people. Thea pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. What can I do? Nothing. That's the terrible part. Anything you say will be twisted. If you defend Cassian, you're proof of manipulation. If you stay silent, you're complicit. He moved closer. The only thing you can do is be certain of your own truth. Know why you're choosing him, and let that certainty hold you when everything else feels unstable. I am certain. Good. Hold on to that. That evening, Cassian arrived at her room looking exhausted. The inquiry is expanding, he said without preamble. They want to question your father, your aunt, anyone who knew Kit in his final months. Thea's chest tightened. My father isn't well enough for this kind of stress. I know. I tried to argue that his testimony isn't necessary, but... He dragged a hand through his hair. Marchmont's lawyers are insisting. They think your father might have information that contradicts the official story. He doesn't. He knew nothing about the investigation. I believe you. They don't. Cassian sat heavily on the edge of her bed. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Owen said the same thing. His head came up sharply. Hartley was here? This afternoon. He came to apologize for pursuing me and to tell me he testified on your behalf. Something complicated crossed Cassian's face. That was decent of him. Very. Thea moved to stand in front of him, between his knees. Her hands found his shoulders. He also said Marchmont's allies are using our relationship as evidence of manipulation. I know. Does it bother you? That people think you're using me? It infuriates me. His hands came to her waist, holding her there. But I knew it would happen. The moment I chose to court you publicly, I knew there would be speculation, accusations, political weaponization of our relationship. And yet, you did it anyway. Because the alternative was losing you, and that... His voice roughened. That wasn't acceptable. She cupped his face, thumbs brushing the shadows under his eyes. You look exhausted. I am. Lying to investigators is surprisingly tiring. Her hands stilled. You're lying to them. Not about the important things. The evidence is real. Kit's investigation was legitimate. Marchmont is guilty. He pulled her closer, forehead resting against her stomach. But I'm lying about procedure, about how certain documents were obtained, about whether I had proper authorization for some of the investigative methods we used. Cassian, if I tell the complete truth, the entire case against Marchmont collapses on technical grounds. Illegally obtained evidence, warrants issued retroactively, surveillance conducted without proper Crown approval. He looked up at her. Kit died for this investigation. I won't let his work be destroyed, because we didn't follow protocol perfectly while trying to expose treason. What happens if they discover you're lying? I could be stripped of my position, possibly face charges myself. He said it calmly, like discussing the weather. But they won't discover it. I've been very careful. Thea's heart was pounding. You're risking everything. I'm protecting what matters. There's a difference. His hands tightened at her waist. And what matters is justice for Kit, safety for you, and not letting corrupt men escape consequences because they can afford better lawyers. This is insane. Probably. He pulled her down onto his lap, arms wrapping around her. But I've made my choice. I chose Kit 3 years ago when I decided to use his evidence. I'm choosing you now, and I'm choosing to live with the consequences of both. She twisted to face him properly, legs straddling his hips in a way that would have scandalized every etiquette instructor in England. If this falls apart, if they discover the lies, I'm not letting you face it alone. You won't have a choice. I'll make sure you're protected. Stop trying to protect me. We're in this together. Thea. She kissed him. Hard, desperate, cutting off whatever noble nonsense he was about to spout. He responded immediately, hands sliding into her hair, mouth opening under hers. The kiss turned fierce, all the tension and fear of the past week pouring into it. His hands found the buttons at the back of her dress, started unfastening them with shaking fingers. We shouldn't, he murmured against her mouth, even as he continued undoing buttons. We shouldn't, she agreed, pulling at his cravat. Anyone could discover us. I locked the door. Your reputation is already being destroyed by political speculation. What's a little more scandal? She got his cravat loose, started on his shirt buttons. Besides, we're engaged, technically. Eventually engaged. There's a difference. Not to me. She pulled back to look at him. Cassian, I choose you. Now. Not eventually. Not when it's convenient or politically safe. Now. Something in his expression cracked. Thea? I love you. I want you. And I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment when everything is resolved and scandal-free. That moment might never come. So I'm choosing this moment instead. He stared at her, breathing hard. You're certain? Completely. Because there's no going back. You'll be mine, fully, and I'll be yours, regardless of what the inquiry decides, or what people say, or... She kissed him again, swallowing his words. I'm already yours. Have been since the garden. Maybe before that. This just makes it official. Official requires marriage, he said, but his hands were already moving, sliding her dress off her shoulders. Then marry me. Tomorrow. Tonight. I don't care about the ceremony. I care about you. I care about you too much to ruin you. You're not ruining me. You're choosing me. There's a difference. She started working on his shirt again, hands steadier now. And I'm choosing you back. So stop arguing and—" He kissed her silent, stood with her still wrapped around him, and moved them toward the bed. "We're really doing this," he murmured against her throat. "We're really doing this. Your father will murder me. Probably, but you'll die happy. Despite everything, the inquiry, the danger, the impossible circumstances, he laughed, real laughter, breaking through tension like sunlight through clouds. I love you, he said, lowering her onto the bed. God, I love you so much. It terrifies me. Good, she whispered, pulling him down to her. Be terrified. Be reckless. Be human for once, instead of perfectly controlled. So he was. They undressed each other slowly, despite urgency thrumming through both of them. Every button, every ribbon, another barrier falling. When skin finally met skin, they both stopped, breathing hard. Last chance to change your mind, he said, voice rough. Not a chance. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she opened for him completely. What followed was clumsy and breathtaking, and nothing like the poetry books suggested. There was fumbling, nervous laughter, whispered questions, and murmured reassurances. But there was also tenderness, reverence, the overwhelming sense of rightness that came from choosing each other completely. When he finally moved inside her, slow, careful, watching her face for any sign of pain, she understood what all the whispered conversations and scandalous novels had been trying to describe. This was connection, vulnerability, trust made physical. All right, he managed, holding himself still despite the strain evident in every muscle. More than all right, she breathed. Don't stop. So he didn't. They moved together, finding rhythm through trial and awkwardness, until awkwardness gave way to something more primal, more essential. When pleasure crested, surprising her with its intensity, she cried out his name. He followed moments later, face buried in her neck, her name a broken prayer on his lips. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing gradually slowing. Cassian traced patterns on her bare shoulder, expression dazed. That was revolutionary, she offered. I was going to say, possibly the most important decision I've ever made, but revolutionary works too. She turned to face him properly. No regrets? About making love to you? Never. He kissed her forehead. About the timing and propriety and scandal we've just created. Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. She nestled closer, marveling at the intimacy of skin against skin. We should probably discuss practical matters. Such as? Marriage. Actual marriage, not eventual marriage. Yes, to that. Soon? As soon as the inquiry concludes. I won't marry you under a cloud of scandal. You deserve better. I deserve you? The scandal is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant to me. He tipped her chin up. When I marry you, I want it to be celebration, not damage control. I want your father present and approving. I want the ton to see that I'm choosing you because I love you, not because I've compromised you. You have compromised me. They don't know that, yet. He grimaced. God, your father really is going to murder me. Only if he finds out before the wedding. He'll know. Fathers always know. She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. Then we'd better marry quickly. Agreed. He pulled her closer. 1 month. Give me 1 month to clear my name and prove Marchmont's accusations are nonsense. Then I'm marrying you so thoroughly that no one can question it. 1 month. You have my word. She kissed him, slow and sweet. I'll hold you to it. Outside, the moon set over Greymont's gardens. Inside, 2 people who'd spent years fighting their feelings finally surrendered to them completely. And whatever scandal followed, whatever consequences emerged, they would face it together. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Chapter 13. The inquiry concluded 2 weeks later with findings that surprised no one who'd been paying attention. Lord Marchmont's corruption was irrefutably documented. The evidence Kit Brennan had gathered, cross-referenced, authenticated, corroborated by independent sources, proved embezzlement, bribery, and conspiracy to commit treason. His son's allegations of fabrication were dismissed as desperate attempts to salvage a guilty man's reputation. The procedural questions about how evidence was obtained remained unanswered. The inquiry's final report noted irregularities in investigative methods, but concluded these didn't invalidate the findings. A careful political compromise. Marchmont stayed imprisoned. Cassian's reputation remained intact, and the questions about proper protocol were quietly shelved. Thea watched Cassian read the findings in his study, saw relief and exhaustion war in his expression. "It's over," she said. "This part is." He set down the report. "Now comes the harder part." "Which is?" "Convincing your father I'm worthy of you." They travelled to her aunt's house 3 days later. Thea's father looked older than she remembered, greyer, more fragile, but his eyes were sharp when they landed on Cassian, standing rigid and formal in the drawing room. "Your Highness," her father said, "when you visited weeks ago to tell me the truth about Kit, I wondered if there was more to the story. Now I understand what you were preparing me for." Cassian's jaw tightened. "Sir, You've been courting my daughter." "Yes, sir." "Publicly, despite the scandal it would cause, despite the political complications?" "Yes, sir." Her father's gaze moved to Thea. "And you? You choose this, knowing what it means?" "I do," Thea said quietly. "I choose him. I love him." "Love." Her father sighed, settling into his chair with the careful movements of someone whose body no longer obeyed easily. "Kit wrote to me about you, Your Highness. Did you know that?" Cassian went very still. "No, sir." "Several times, actually. Always praising your intelligence, your integrity, your friendship." He paused. "In his final letter, the one I showed you, there was a postscript. I didn't mention it when you visited." From his pocket, he withdrew a worn paper, read aloud. "P.S. If anything happens to me, and if by some miracle you manage to stop being an idiot about your feelings, Thea would be good for you. She's stubborn enough to call you on your nonsense and kind enough to forgive you for it. Don't let honor or guilt stop you from being happy. I'd consider it a personal favor." Silence filled the room. Thea's throat burned with unshed tears. Cassian looked like he'd been struck. "My son," her father said quietly, "gave you permission to court his sister before he died, knowing you cared for her, knowing she might come to care for you." He looked at Cassian directly. "The question is, are you honoring that permission or exploiting it?" "Honoring it, sir. I swear to you." Cassian's voice was rough. "I love your daughter, have loved her for years, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to marry her." "Allow it." Her father smiled faintly. "As if I could stop her. Thea has always made her own choices. She gets that from her mother. Sir. But I will ask you one question, Your Highness, and I want an honest answer. Anything. Can you forgive yourself for Kit's death enough to be fully present in my daughter's life? Or will you always be looking backward, punishing yourself, letting guilt poison what should be joy? The question landed like a blow. Cassian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but raw. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself. Your son died because I was too cautious, too concerned with protocol. That's a failure I'll carry always. He paused. But I'm learning that carrying it doesn't mean letting it destroy me, or destroy what I have with Thea. Kit's letter, both of them, gave me permission to move forward. I'm trying to honor that instead of hiding behind guilt. Her father studied him, then nodded. That's an honest answer. I respect that. He turned to Thea. You're certain about this? Completely. Then you have my blessing, both of you. He stood carefully, crossed to where they stood, took Cassian's hand. Take care of my daughter, Your Highness. Make her happy. That's all I ask. I will, sir. I promise. Her father pulled him into an unexpected embrace. Thea heard Cassian's sharp intake of breath, saw his hands come up to return it awkwardly. And thank you, her father murmured, for finishing Kit's work, for using his investigation to bring justice, for not letting his death be meaningless. When they pulled apart, both men's eyes were bright. They were married 1 month later, as Cassian had promised. Not a grand state affair. Neither of them wanted that. Instead, a private ceremony in the chapel at Greymont, with only family and close friends present. Thea wore a dress of ivory silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit. Simple, elegant, perfect. Cassian wore his dress uniform, but his hands shook when she walked down the aisle. Her father gave her away. Cordelia stood as her attendant. Owen Hartley was there, smiling genuinely despite everything. Even Lady Vivian attended, managing to look gracious about her loss. The ceremony was brief. Traditional vows, spoken with voices that trembled but didn't falter. When Cassian kissed her, properly, thoroughly, as her husband, the small gathering applauded. Afterward, there was a wedding breakfast. Toasts were made. Stories were shared about Kit, about love, about second chances. Thea caught Cassian's eye across the table and saw the same dazed happiness she felt reflected back. They'd made it. Through scandal and inquiry and impossible circumstances. They were married. Finally, properly, irrevocably. Evening found them in the chambers that had been prepared for them, a suite overlooking the gardens where everything had begun. Thea stood at the window, watching twilight settle over the grounds. Cassian came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "Hello, wife," he murmured. "Hello, husband." She leaned back into him. Having second thoughts? Not even slightly. You? None whatsoever. They stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness claim the gardens. "I have something for you," Cassian said finally. He moved to the desk, returned with a worn leather journal. "Kit's," he said quietly. "From his investigation? I've been keeping it safe. I thought, now that we're married, now that the inquiry is over, you should have it. To remember him by, to understand what he was fighting for." Thea took it with trembling hands, opened to a random page, saw her brother's handwriting. "Met with C today. Showed him the latest evidence. He's worried it's too dangerous, wants me to slow down. But I can't. Not when we're this close." These bastards have been stealing from the crown, from honest people, for years. Someone has to stop them. C thinks I'm being reckless. Maybe I am. But someone has to be willing to take risks. That's what he doesn't understand. Being careful has its place. But sometimes you have to act, even when it's dangerous. Still, he's a good friend. Best I've ever had. I trust him completely. Thea closed the journal carefully. Thank you for keeping this, for giving it to me. He would have wanted you to have it. She set it aside, turned to face him properly. We should talk about what happens next, where we'll live, what our role will be, how to navigate being the crown prince and his wife. We should, he agreed. Tomorrow? Tonight I just want to be with you? No politics, no duty, just us. Just us, she echoed. I like the sound of that. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You terrify me and ground me and make me want to be better than I am. You're already better than you think, only because you see me that way. He kissed her softly. Thank you for choosing me, for forgiving me, for loving me despite everything. There's no despite. I love you because of everything, the good and the complicated and the messy. She pulled him toward the bed, their bed now, properly. What followed was different from their first time, less desperate, more assured. They undressed each other slowly, savoring. Every button, every ribbon, a small ceremony of intimacy. When they came together, skin to skin, breath to breath, it felt like coming home. Cassian moved inside her with aching tenderness, murmuring her name like a prayer, telling her with his body what words could never fully capture. She answered with her own movement, her own whispered endearments, showing him without hesitation that she was his completely. When pleasure crested, slower this time, building like a wave instead of crashing, they held each other through it. Afterward, tangled in sheets and each other, Cassian traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. What are you thinking? Thea asked. That Kit was right, as usual. About what? You being good for me, stubborn enough to call me on my nonsense, kind enough to forgive me for it. He smiled. I wish he could have been here today. Seen this? He was here, Thea said quietly. In the vows, in your promise to my father, in the fact that we found each other at all. She paused. He would be happy for us. I think so too. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds outside. Cassian? Thank you. For being brave enough to choose me, for fighting through guilt and fear and impossible circumstances. You made it impossible not to. He pulled her closer. From the moment you walked into Greymont, questioning why I was distant, refusing to let me hide, you made it impossible to keep running. Good. I'm tired of running. So am I. She lifted her head to look at him. So what do we do now? Now? He smiled. Now we live. We love. We build a life together that honors Kit's memory without being imprisoned by it. We make mistakes and forgive each other and try again. She kissed him, cutting off his words. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. We start tomorrow, she said. Tonight, we just be together. I can do that. So they did. Outside, the moon rose over Greymont's gardens, the same gardens where everything had changed, where confession and desire had finally shattered years of restraint. Inside, two people who'd found each other through grief and guilt and impossible circumstances held each other close. Their story wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, wasn't the romance novels promised, but it was real, hard-won and honest and entirely theirs. And that, Thea thought as she drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, was worth more than any perfect fairy tale. Kit had given them permission to be happy. Finally, they were brave enough to take it. Epilogue. 6 months later. The London ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles. Thea stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching Cassian navigate a conversation with several foreign dignitaries. He looked every inch the crown prince, composed, authoritative, perfectly in control. Then his eyes found hers across the room, and his expression softened in a way only she could read. "Excuse me," he mouthed. She smiled, watching him extract himself from the conversation with practiced diplomacy and make his way to her. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. "We've already danced twice. People will talk." "Let them." He pulled her onto the floor. "I'm dancing with my wife. If that's scandalous, society needs better gossip." They moved together with the ease of practice. 6 months of marriage had taught them each other's rhythms. "Lady Vivian is watching us," Thea murmured. "She looks like she's sucking lemons." "Lady Vivian always looks like that when we're happy." "Poor thing. We must be torture for her." "Absolutely." He spun her, grinning. "How are you feeling?" His hand pressed slightly at her waist, protective, aware. She was 2 months pregnant. They'd told no one yet, except her father. "Fine. Stop fussing." "I'm not fussing. I'm being attentive." "You're being obvious." "I don't care." He pulled her closer than the dance strictly required. "I'm going to be insufferable about this for the next 7 months. You should prepare yourself." 7 months of you hovering? At minimum. Despite herself, Thea laughed. Kit would have been impossible too. Overprotective and bossy and utterly convinced he knew best. "He would have been a nightmare of an uncle," Cassian agreed. His voice softened. "I wish he could meet them. Our children." "Me too." She squeezed his hand. "But we'll make sure they know him. Through stories, through his journal, through the work he did that will continue." "The Kit Brennan Foundation for Political Integrity," Cassian said. "Still think that's too on the nose?" "I think it's perfect. He would have hated the attention and loved the impact." The music swelled. They turned together, perfectly synchronized. "Happy?" Cassian asked quietly. Thea looked up at her husband. This man who'd loved her despite impossible circumstances, who'd fought through guilt and fear to choose her, who was trying every day to be worthy of the second chance they'd been given. "Deliriously," she said, and meant it. Their story had started with grief, with loss and silence and years of restraint. But it had become something else entirely, something real, something lasting, something worth every difficult choice that had brought them here. Outside, London sparkled under stars. Inside, 2 people danced, honoring the past while building their future. And somewhere, Thea liked to think, Kit Brennan watched and smiled. His investigation had brought down corruption. His friendship had shaped a prince. His sister had found love. Not a bad legacy for one life, however short. Not bad at all. The end. And so, beneath moonlit gardens and unspoken vows, love found its reckoning. If this story stirred your heart, if you felt the weight of longing, the ache of restraint, and the beauty of a love hard won, then you've stepped exactly where romance awaits. Thank you for spending your time here at Romance Haven. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe so you never miss your next escape into love, longing, and happily ever afters. Until our next tale, keep your heart open, keep dreaming boldly, and as always, happy listening.